Hey, can you hear me now? Can everyone hear me now? Everyone's good on the YouTubes and the Twitch? Can you guys hear me? Excellent. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me start over. Okay, welcome one and all to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we get together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. And today's topic is rather serious. We're going to be talking about abusers, abusive people who go in and engage in all forms of abuse, domestic, interpersonal abuse, those who abuse others online, all sorts of abusers. Do we, as a society, demonize them too much, or do we coddle them? Should we be harsher or less harsh upon those of us who commit abuse? Let's find out. I've gathered a wonderful team together, and we're gonna get right into it. We're gonna start with brief opening statements, and then we'll just do the open discussion. First and foremost, we're gonna pass it to Fairy Queen. Go ahead. Give us what you got.
Everyone, give me just one moment.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I promise to persuade you to disagree with the motion. We demonize abusers far too much. I intend to demonstrate in tonight's discussion that the opposition will not be able to demonstrate on any of the following three levels that these institutions suffer from demonizing abusers too much. Those institutions include our judicial system, our school systems, public health, hospitals and nursing homes, and our interpersonal lives. Number one, our judicial system. The vast majority of perpetrators will not go to jail or prison. According to RAINN, out of 1,000 sexual assaults, only 975 will walk free. Number two, our school systems, hospitals, and especially our public health. Public health organizations from the CDC, the World Health Organization, the Office of Violence Against Women in the United States, DOJ, none of them describe abusers terribly. What they do is they describe what abuse looks like, and they already work to dispel what most people believe an abuser to be. And most domestic violence campaigns, they generally depict victims, and they generally attempt to depict what abuse looks like. So an example of this would be the That's Not Love campaign by the One Love Foundation. Finally, our interpersonal lives. And this is the part I think that will hit home with every person listening. When sexual abuse occurs in particular, family members may side with those who abuse instead of the survivor. In fact, out of all child sexual abuse cases, 34% are committed by family members. I will make one final request before I finish my opening statement. I request that all mentions of our society, or our culture, or our country at large, or any other group of glittering generalities be promptly tossed in the trash. If the opposition wishes to prove tonight that we demonize abusers for too much, they have chosen to shoulder the burden to illustrate how. Make them give you numbers. Make them name the institution that they want to change. The opposition will likely argue that our desire to hold abusers accountable stems from an emotional response rather than a careful examination of the evidence. In fact, as I claim, our conversation tonight will prove the opposite is true.
Well, thank you. And, well, we already had a little contention, but Smeth, you're up next, so give it to us. Let's hear what you got.
All right. I think that we need to be less demonizing of abusers because we are all abusers. Some people cross a line where we decide that they need to go to jail, and if it's true that, and obviously it is true that not enough people that do horrible things, like not enough rapes, get prosecuted, not enough abusers go to jail, not enough abusers have to reconcile their abuse. That is absolutely true. And the solution to that would be to improve our judicial system and make it so they actually do. Supplementing that by demonizing them, we're all just tearing out each other's eyes, and we're making the world a worse place. And if you do not love yourself, nobody's going to love you. So you have to love yourself no matter what. Trying to tell people not to love themselves is a way to make the world a way worse place, and it's no good is going to come of it.
Thank you for that, and we will absolutely get into it as we go. Next up, we have the Vigilante TV. Go ahead.
So, does society demonize abusers? Or over-demonize abusers? Abso-fucking-lutely not. Not only should we demonize abusers more as a society, we should also punish abuse more strongly than we already do. Child abuse is punished as a misdemeanor in a lot of states. And then in a lot of states, it is punished as a minimum of a 5-year average, which is not nearly enough. And this only accounts for physical and sexual abuse. And it does not even account for mental or psychological abuse. And when it comes to mental or psychological abuse in our justice system, it's not even often punished. In order to prove psychological or mental abuse, you have to prove stalking, harassment, threats, and a lot more. And you have to have a large amount of proof. And when I say a large amount of proof, you have to have loads and loads of files on it. My dad has had to prove this, has had to prove stalking. I am somebody who just got out of an abusive relationship. So I am somebody who is in the process of wanting and trying to prove this. And it is a pain in the ass to try to prove, especially if you're a man accusing a woman of abuse.
Okay, thank you for being here. We'll get into it, I'm sure. Next up, Joey. Is that what you want me to call you? At the bottom. You're muted on your end.
I apologize.
It's fine. You got a camera for us tonight?
I do. I'm getting there. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Well, I am for the side that I do believe that we demonize abusers way too much. One, not to get too personal, but I am a domestic violence survivor. And one thing that I do know from my own experience that, the abusers, also have, their traumas as well. And if we're going to be validated for what we've gone through, I do believe that we kind of have to validate them as well. Also, I have my notes here. I'm so sorry. I think we lose out when we demonize abusers to any capacity too much. Because one, we lose the lack of rehabilitation. We also lose the chance for to advocate for the victims. A lot of the times, if you kind of follow, the aftermath of abusers, usually they're in prison for like 3 years. And I do agree that, as far as a lot of the criminal penalties, they're not up to par with some violent crimes. But yeah, I do believe that we're at a loss when we can't rehabilitate abusers, or at least know where they're coming from. Yeah.
Hey, thank you for being here. Once you get your camera sorted out, just pop it on, and we'll get into it. Next up,
Yeah, fun day.
Art by Pep. Can I just call you Pep for short?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's turn you up just a smidge. Okay, go ahead. What you got for us?
So I feel like I'm going to fall between a couple of people here, but I think we, in some ways, demonize abusers a little bit too much, but in other ways, not enough. I feel like we demonize abusers in an incorrect and unhelpful way. I feel like cancel culture just really plays to like the emotions of people, of like wanting to like socially lynch somebody essentially, but it doesn't really help with accountability or actually preventing them from abusing people in the future. Usually, like with the Me Too movement, everybody will get mad at a person and they'll go up in flames, but then after that happens, there's no follow-up, there's no accountability. That same person can continue to do things as they please, basically. There's only a few industries in which I feel like the cancel culture kind of style of justice actually does work, and one of them is somewhat Hollywood. Depending on how many connections the person has, they can get burned there. But in normal things like corporate places, normal life, like restaurants, things like that, and in normal day-to-day situations, I don't feel like cancel culture is really applicable or useful, and I think it does more harm than good, and we need to focus on like actual actionable accountability.
If you wouldn't mind turning your mic up, I got you 200% on Discord.
Sorry.
You're still pretty quiet, so if you can just
Yeah,
touch that up a few notches, we can get in there. But last, but certainly not least, Rora Pickles, go ahead.
Hello. Excuse me. I want to address a crucial issue that often goes overlooked when discussing abuse: the need to challenge the way we demonize it. By imposing our biases and stigmas, we hinder progress in recognizing and addressing abuse effectively. It's important to understand that abuse exists on a spectrum with varying degrees of severity. While some forms are clearly inexcusable, we must acknowledge that mutual abuse in relationships is more common than we think. Destigmatizing abuse while holding abusers accountable is a crucial step forward. We need to create an environment where those displaying abusive behaviors feel safe seeking help and intervention. It's important to emphasize that this does not excuse or condone abuse in any way. We must continue to hold abusers accountable for their actions, however. By examining these situations through a more compassionate and comprehensive lens, we can encourage personal growth and healing for both victims and abusers.
Excellent. And with that, let's get into it. Like I said, if you have trouble getting in and you want to have your voice heard and can't seem to get into the conversation, let me see your hand. I'll give you space. But other than that, go at it, gang. The floor is open.
Does anybody here think that they've never been abusive to a partner?
I definitely have been, for sure.
That is an interesting question, Smith, but I think that I'd like to ask a question before that, if that's all right. I would like to hear what everyone's definition of what abuse means and what we mean when we say abuser. What do you mean when you say abuse? Specifically, concretely.
Taking advantage of someone at their expense, causing harm to them or distress unreasonably. Like, you are putting yourself before them and you're putting them in a great amount of distress.
It's unfortunate because there's a lot of examples of that where people have no idea they're abusing someone, right? So that is kind of difficult. But abuse is causing harm to someone psychologically or physically by different means. It can be manipulation, physical, all different kinds of ways. I have been abused and I have abused people. So I come from a very anecdotal experience in this. But, I think the definition varies person to person, but I do find it is watered down in some cases.
For the sake of this discussion, if we may, right? Instead of spending like an hour discussing what abuse is and what abuse isn't, let's stick to the hard stuff. Let's stick to the situations where everyone can say that's abusive, such as beating your partner physically or verbally assaulting again and again your partner or a friend or someone else who is in your life. Can we all kind of agree to kind of stick within that realm of things so we don't get into the nuance of, well, I told my partner I was going to take out the trash, but then I didn't take out the trash, therefore I lied, therefore that's abusive, right?
Well, I had an example of a lesser one. Can you tell me if you think this qualifies as not enough, or it's an example of myself? I talked to, so my girlfriend told me that I was being too aggressive, and I noticed when it happened that I was really pissed off. It was a stressful situation. We were moving, and I was just really angry. And neither of us had showered, and we had removed all the stuff to take a shower. And I was angry I couldn't take a shower when we were sleeping unshowered. And I just rolled over and I was like looking at the wall, and after yelling at her, and then she like got up and like went out of her way to like fix the situation. I didn't ask her to do that. And afterwards she said that she felt intimidated by me. And I accept that I was too aggressive and I take responsibility for that. And I'm glad she told me. And and she wasn't telling me to demonize me. She was telling me to help improve the relationship. Like, this happened and we need to remedy it. And it was abusive, but it wasn't abusive like, on the terms of like hitting or like severe harassment or psychological torment, but I wasn't behaving in a way that was healthy or productive.
I think if I may, I think I will echo what Wick said. And I think that the standard that perhaps we should agree to apply to our conversation for this specifically, I think that's a valid thing to talk about, whether or not we are abusive to people in our everyday lives. But that's not, for the purposes of this conversation, if we're saying, do we demonize abusers too much? The premise of that question already accepts that the population of people we're talking about are abusive and are abusers, right? That's the question that we gather tonight to discuss, which means that whatever definition it is that you have personally, regardless of whether it's very high or very low or interpersonal, it would have to constitute as abuse if that's what we're talking about, right?
I think often emotional abuse is kind of minimized. And I think if that's a repeat behavior over and over, I would definitely consider that abuse. If that is a constant, if you're living with someone and that person is terrified to communicate with you based on simple like fear of lashing out or having things spun against them or whatever, that in a massive scale is abuse. And I think often emotional abuse is super minimized. And I think people who are emotionally abused, I was one of those person for over 7 years in a marriage of mine. What happens is people who also get emotionally abused, it's so easy to become a victim in that mindset and to not see that you become part of that toxic cycle. And that's how, without realizing, we also become abusers. Every single person has abusive tendencies. It's a part of humanity. It's just to what degree is actually damaging to the world around us, right? And if you're hurting people on a serial level over and over and over like that, that's abuse. That's serious. You know what I mean? And that's to be worked on. So I find
And then
that
they cope with it. They cope with it by becoming abusers. Like the only way to respond to that is to now like she would have to, if I was doing that repeatedly, she would have to do something abusive to me to be able to withstand it.
And I was in a situation like that for many years, and I'm very ashamed of many of my behaviors because I wasn't the main abuser, but I also became an abuser. And my therapist looked at me after getting out of that relationship and said, Rora, if you don't stop being a victim, you will never grow out of your own abusive tendencies yourself. Because when you're in a victim mindset and you know you're being abused, it is so much easier to become that without even realizing, because we often justify a lot of these behaviors based on a survival perspective alone. So if that's the only way you know and it works, how else do you know if it's bad, right? You know what I mean? And the resources around us and the way the world looks at it and demonizes it, how the hell are we ever even going to know?
I want to agree with that. There's so many instances where someone mentioned earlier that there are plenty of instances
Can you
of
turn it
abuse
up
where-
just a little more? Your mic's still
Yes,
pretty low.
sorry.
Is this just
Also,
me?
Let me move it a little bit
Oh,
closer.
yeah,
Oh,
move
it
it
might be-
closer. That'll probably do it.
Yeah, here, I'll turn it. How's this?
That's
A
better.
little better,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah,
can make
yeah,
it
much more
even
clear.
louder if
Even louder
needed.
would be better.
Even louder a little bit.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, keep going. Don't
How's
stop.
this?
The 11. You see
Good?
the 11,
Better?
right? And on your knob, you just turn it up to
Might be
11,
able
right?
to- Okay, how's this?
Oh, beautiful.
Good.
Brilliant. Okay.
Okay, perfect. All right. Somebody earlier mentioned that plenty of people engage in abuse while they're like not aware that they're doing it, and I completely agree with that. Not all abuse is. I would say the majority of abuse isn't done with like conscious intent to abuse somebody. I think most abuse is like a maladaptive kind of coping or self-defense mechanism that people have learned over the years, like she said, of just like because they had to learn something that worked. And if they were in a toxic environment or like they didn't have like a healthy family modeled for them or a healthy relationships modeled for them and only engaged in unhealthy ones, then of course people are going to just learn what works in those environments, and that things that work in toxic environments are not so great when you transition to healthy environments.
Okay. 2 things.
So-
Go ahead, please.
So I have a response for Roar, and I have a response for 𝕵𝖎𝖎, and I have a response for 𝕬𝖎. And my response is pretty much the same. Do you have a source is my question. So Aurora, you mentioned, for instance, that the world demonizes it. 𝕬𝖎, you mentioned earlier, like in your opening statement, for instance, that I think you said, like, we're making the world a worse place, like we're teaching people not to love themselves. And 𝕬𝖎𝖎, you mentioned that, like, it's used as a coping mechanism for a maladaptive behavior that's learned from family. My question is, do you have a source that, like, who is the world? Who is the we that is saying this? I think it's very important to say who specifically we're talking about. Are we talking about school systems, public health campaigns? Are we talking about legislation? Are we talking about famous speakers? Are we talking about how most people manage their interpersonal lives? In which case, do you have like a survey, like from Pew Research, for instance, that shows that? How do we know for a fact that that happens? Like, what source, what data are you basing that off of? And 𝕬𝖎𝖎, even though I think that that's true, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. even though I think that that's true, I still think it's really important to look at the source data that you're talking about and the specific context that it's in. What's the source that you're referring to?
So there are
I
lots
have.
of there. Sorry, go ahead.
You
Did
can
you
go. You can
want to?
go.
Okay.
Oh, she just.
So there are.
Pep, then
it-
Smith. That's the order we're going. Go ahead.
Yeah, there are. I don't have one handy, but I could probably Google and in 10 seconds have myriad sources of how a lot of abusive behavior comes from negative family dynamics or learned maladaptive behaviors. Like that's such a huge thing in psychiatry, therapy, all this stuff. There's like family dynamics therapy. It's a very, very common thing that people only behave how they learn to behave. And often that comes from being in those situations that are toxic.
Basic psychology would be the source there. But what a point I want to make about I can prove to you that we are minimizing, or rather, we're demonizing abusers, and that's a problem. Because I think that by the nature of the way this conversation has even been structured, it's just indicative of the way we do this. The fact that you want to only focus on the most extreme examples makes it impossible for us to discuss the fact that we're all actually abusers, and it exists on a spectrum, and it gets worse and worse, and gets to a certain point, and then it's like, oh, now you're like illegally you're an abuser. You're an abuser that should go to jail now. But it's something that exists within all of us. And if we only talk about the extremes, we should be able to openly and welcomely, warmly discuss our own abuses and the abuses of others towards us in our lives. Like, you're doing this is not good for me, this is not working. Like I'm being abused by you. Like, and it doesn't have to be a condemnation.
I think my source comes from, interestingly enough, how, and I will say again, the world reacted to the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case. I never once picked a side, and a lot of people grabbed pitchforks in that situation, and I knew immediately, I could feel that was a much more nuanced and difficult situation than we can even imagine, right? But that's not how it looked on the outside. It looked quite polarized, and this is a very micro example, correct? I do have to say that often when abuse is brought up, like Smith said, it's often the extreme examples that are brought up. And I do find it interesting that people who want to say, for example, not necessarily destigmatize all abuse, but talk about it on a more nuanced and gentle level, are accused of being the ones emotional, but we're not going to the extreme examples. We're not requiring people to cite specific examples and details in studies. I'm going based off of real evidence that I've been through, anecdotal evidence, and also stuff that we see every day on social media. And we can't deny that social media isn't the real world anymore. It is becoming integrated in our everyday lives.
I have a question for Vigilante. I know you're pretty quiet, Vigilante, but you mentioned in your opening statement something that I want to kind of drill down on if we can. You mentioned, right, that we do not punish abusers enough. In your world, like, what would be the punishment for some of these lesser forms of abuse, like Smith was talking about? So would Smith's interaction with his girlfriend merit, if repeated, merit some sort of legal intervention in your mind? Do you think that the government should get involved in things like that more? What's your stance here?
I mean, if repeated to the point where like she decided she needed to leave, I mean, essentially, yeah. I mean, that is a very small example of like stuff that happened in the relationship I was in. Granted, the relationship I was in hit literally all fucking 6 points of abuse, of the types of abuse. So, like, but when we talk about abuse, like specifically child abuse, you have some states that only give like a 3-month minimum. You have some states that hit like a 5-month minimum.
Okay.
You have some states have a 10-month minimum or a 10-year minimum. So it varies state to state.
Okay, to the other side, why should we punish that harshly? If someone is abusing a child, why should we coddle them and say, well, we understand what you did, we understand why you did it, oh, that was so, I understand you had a hard day at work, oh, that's so sad, right? Why, in the other side's opinion here, so Joey, Smith, and Rora, Why coddle that? Why should we be understanding of that?
I don't think coddle is the right word to use. I think that we should, again, abuse has varying degrees, and I find child abuse to be one of the most extreme examples ever. I mean, I've been R-worded, I've been beaten up, I've had my teeth knocked out, I have been through a lot of severe emotional abuse, and I'm just saying that it's nuanced, and it obviously depends on the degree of abuse. And what I find is these extreme examples. We immediately go to the worst thing, and I think something like that should obviously be punished. Like, I don't think not. I don't think that should
Do
be
you think it
coddled.
should be demonized?
Demonized is, I don't know. When I see people on Twitter and they say, I want all child abusers to be K-worded and stuff like that, I don't know if I vibe with that. I don't think, I just don't wish that ill on someone else. And I've been abused as a child,
I
so.
wanna toss it to Joey a little bit. Is Joey what you want me to call you? Is Joey fine?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Joey, what about you? Why shouldn't we demonize people who do this?
Well, first, like to your former question, I don't think victims actually. It's very rarely that a victim actually gets the other perspective of like why, not that they need it, but like why that this happened. They even looking at other cases. Usually, it's the far spectrum of like of what like really bad abusers that are somehow interviewed for what they did. But again, I'm not saying that that's what victims need, but a lot of the, like with domestic violence, the what we choose as a punishment is just the justice system. There's not very much rehabilitation for abusers. Even it's, sexual assault, that has a tougher penalty. But again, like I know it is hard to prove those cases. It's hard to prove domestic violence. But the thing is that maybe if we didn't demonize the abuser or the act itself, we wouldn't have so many people that don't come forward. I know firsthand, not to be specific, but I rarely see a victim press charges against her abuser, and I mean rarely. And that's a sad thing, especially when you're trying to create a safe space around victims. Yeah, but
Go ahead. And then I see
Question?
you, Smith, after you, and now go ahead.
So I wanted to respond to something that, and I apologize if I don't address each of the things that each of you three had to say, but the reason why I asked for a source specifically on whether or not it's true, and I'm sure that it is true that childhood abuse does have an impact on whether or not someone grows up to be an abuser. But I also know, based off of some of the sources that I read for today, is that many abusers understand the mileage of talking about their abuse and using that as an excuse for why they became an abuser in the future. So an example I could give you is from Lundy Bancroft's book, Why Does He Do That? This was published in 1994, and this is a quote from his book. The National District Attorneys Association Bulletin reported a revealing study that was conducted on another group of destructive men, child sexual abusers. The researcher asked each man whether he himself had been sexually victimized as a child. A hefty 67% of the subjects said yes. However, the researcher then informed the men he was going to hook them up to a lie detector test and then asked them the same questions again. And affirmative answers suddenly dropped down to only 29%. In other words, abusers of all varieties tend to realize the mileage they can get out of saying, I'm abusive because the same thing was done to me. And you can hear that from people who have specifically worked with people who have abusive personalities, people who have been convicted of abuse. And I will respond to the rehabilitation question in a little bit later, but for now, that was the first thing that I wondered. And I bring that up to say that while it may be true that childhood abuse has have an impact on the kind of person you may become in the future, it's also true that there are many people who are abusers who use their childhoods as excuses and as illustrations for why they become abusers later on in life. The second question has to do with how we define abuser and using the most extreme example. I am going to tell you for the purpose of this conversation, the standard that I'm using. So I'm using the CDC's website's definition of intimate partner violence for domestic violence. So physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, and psychological aggression by a current or former intimate partner. Whether or not it meets the standard of abuse, at least for me, for the purposes of this conversation, is whether or not that particular kind of abuse would be legally actionable. So could you take somebody to court and sue them for abuse? That's the standard specifically that I'm talking about. So when you're, for instance, talking of Smith or about having an argument with a girlfriend, if we're talking about snapping at your spouse because the macaroni and cheese was burnt one time, we're not talking about ordinary arguments. We're talking about a consistent pattern of behavior over a long period of time. We're talking about a consistent pattern of behavior of disrespecting somebody's bodily and sexual autonomy. That is specifically what I am talking about. So I don't deny that there are probably examples of where we might mistreat or be toxic to our partners, but at least when I'm talking about abuser, I'm talking about somebody who you can come to court and construct a case for.
Very Queen, just
Yes.
real quick question. Does demonizing those people who do that help? Outside of the legal system, right? Socially.
That's what I was
them-
gonna.
Yeah. Does
Mhm.
demonizing them help? And if so, how?
So I need to understand what we mean when we say demonize. I know there's a general vibe of what
We're
that
gonna
means.
go with. I'll cut
What
this
does
off
that
too.
mean? I
with
can't
the-
answer that.
I'll give you a definition, right? We're not
Okay.
talking about like, oh, that was a bad thing we're to do. We're talking about the people like Rora mentioned, like pedophiles should get the be K-worded, right? Or oh, if you do this, you are a piece of shit who should never be let in society again. If you are a spousal abuser, you should never have a spouse again. You should just be demonized like that. This type of abuse that we're talking about, because we're talking about the legal, right? We've already agreed we're talking about the extreme stuff. So this type of behavior is so bad that we are going to consider you demons, right? That's what I mean by demonize.
I do not believe that we demonize abusers too much whatsoever. And I actually think in the specific example of child sexual abusers, that's actually an example of a category of abusers that isn't demonized enough. And I'll give you and I also think that the discussing rehabilitation, while it does work for sexual sex offenders, it's not the kind of therapy that you think it is. So traditional psychotherapy, that doesn't work when we're talking about sex offenders. Substance abuse counseling, anger management doesn't work when we're talking about people who commit domestic violence. Couples counseling can be extremely dangerous for somebody who is in a marriage or who is in a partnership with somebody who is abusive. The kind of therapy that works with people who are offenders is typically cognitive behavioral therapy or an abuser specialized program. And that is not the same thing as psychotherapy. And one of the big differences between psychotherapy and all of these other traditional models is the purpose of an abuser specialized program is to challenge the abuser's cognitive distortions. That's specifically. So if you read, for instance, the Times article, it talked, for instance, about rehabilitating sex offenders. Every single session that they do, the therapist is not sitting there listening to their childhood, validating their emotions. The therapist is sitting there challenging what they did, challenging them to take responsibility. Most of the people sitting within that therapy, most of the offenders, do not recognize or see themselves as abusers. They do not think of themselves as abusers. They do not think that what they did was abuse. If you read, for instance, Richard Sipes' book, Sex, Priests, and Power, many of the priests who abused those teenage boys and even children much, much younger described it as though they were in love with those boys. And I'll say one more thing, and then I promise I will let you go. And the fear that I have when talking about rehabilitation is this. There was probably no institution on the face of this earth in the early 2000s who wanted to rehabilitate child molesters more than the Catholic Church. And in fact, their use of rehabilitation and their lack of wishing to demonize did not result in safer communities. In fact, it resulted in a widespread of cover-ups. It resulted in huge amounts of abuse continuing to be perpetuated. According to this article, the result, over 87% of bishops, 127 out of 145 dioceses surveyed, reported using treatment centers for clergy accused of child abuse. And many of these institutions, when they try to rehabilitate offenders, they don't rehabilitate offenders and then listen to what the therapists tell them, that they shouldn't be with vulnerable populations, that they shouldn't be brought back with children, that a parish priest shouldn't be working in an elementary school if he molested or raped a young boy. Instead, what they did, they would send these priests to these treatment centers. They would have a very brief moment of rehabilitation, and then the diocese would take those priests and reintegrate them back into these priests, into these parishes. And they did that because they believed that they had been rehabilitated. They believed that anyone can change. And the people who paid the price for that were the children and families within those dioceses. And I'm sorry, now I'll let someone.
Okay, you okay?
Okay. I agree completely. The things that you're talking about are very important. And so the conversation that me and Rory were trying to have, Rora, oh sorry. Yeah, like is kind of I can understand how that might make you emotional because like it's sort of diminishing, but it's kind of a sort of different conversation. But I think we already kind of acknowledged that. I think that the system, the justice system, and the rehabilitation system, if it's failing, it needs to be fixed and needs to work. And if we're doing rehabilitation that doesn't work, then we shouldn't even call it rehabilitation. We just call it a lie. But I think that focusing on I think that we do demonize these things. I think it's obvious. It's in the internet age. It's incredibly obvious. Like the Catholic thing. If the Catholic Church was functioning like online now, like pretty much every other establishment is, it's just on the in the last 20 years, like it's so easy to get a hate mob after you, even if you've literally done nothing. We're so primed and ready to hate people because hate sells and it spreads like wildfire, especially online. And I think that it's created an environment where it's impossible to actually talk about our own actual instances of abuse that don't qualify as a legal problem. We should call them abusive, and we should air out our own abuse. And we're just so afraid to even admit the smallest infraction. We have to be perfect people. We have to present ourselves as perfect people all the time. We're all abusive to each other. Some people do it really, really bad and should be separated from society, and most of us shouldn't.
Go ahead,
And
Vigilante, please.
On the note of what Josie said about us punishing sex abuser, like people that do sexual abuse, we don't. As I've had a study from 2018 from USSC.gov that actually states that 54.9% of sexual abuse offenders were sentenced under the guidelines, and then 41% of the offenders were sent. Only 41.1% of the offenders were sentenced within the guideline range. And then also, there is another study from OJP.gov that states 43% of sex offenders are rearrested for crimes, to also respond to Smith's prior point.
Okay, Aurora, is that your hand up? By the way, I don't
Yes.
know if this you got be more clear because I don't know if
Yeah.
this is a hand. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Could we be
And I can-
overcorrecting?
Oh, I'm
Be-
sorry. Did you finish, Vigilante?
I was gonna say, and I can link both of those in the
Oh,
chat.
okay, thank you. Go ahead, Roy.
Because I don't disagree either with Fairy Queen. I do think that some of the most aggressive means of therapies are why I'm a different person today. My therapist was very aggro with me, and it helped. Being baby did not work, but I just have a question. Because we sort of I apologize, Vigilante was saying, because a lot of people aren't judiciously held accountable for their abuse. Do you think as a society, and especially online, we potentially almost overcorrect and like Smith said, gouge each other's eyeballs out because we're sort of not getting those problems solved the way we would like them to? So we're almost like, in a way, societally holding people accountable
We're
in an
vigilantes.
overcorrection.
We're all
Yeah.
vigilantes in a sense.
Ah,
Okay.
boom-tsh.
Well, my response
I
to
mean-
you. Oh, sorry. Somebody else wanted to speak.
I was gonna say not necessarily. I mean, because of the fact that they're not being held accountable by the justice system, they have to be held accountable by society. And as a society, we don't even necessarily hold them accountable nearly enough.
What does that mean? Hold on. What does that mean, holding them accountable? Can you be more specific?
Well, I mean, for example, I'm definitely on the side of like
You said you got out of
pedophiles
an
and
abusive
stuff.
relationship. How would you like to hold them accountable?
I mean, I think my abuser should definitely be in prison, but I can't fucking, even with the amount of proof that I have, which is like voice recordings and shit, I can't use just the few voice recordings that I have, which even has her admitting to the fucking abuse, to put her ass in fucking prison. So, I mean, they should be in prison. And then when it comes to like rapists and stuff, I am on the side of like rapists and pedophiles and stuff should be given the death penalty. So when we talk about people that are on the side of like rapists,
Do we agree
and
with this, gang?
pedophiles
Hold
and
on. I
shit,
don't mean to. I
should
don't want to. I
be
don't mean
given
to
the death
interrupt
penalty,
you, but
I am on that side.
yeah, you're on that
No, I
side.
was
But
gonna say that, yeah, like I feel like most of the accountability that we put towards abusers is the kind that makes us feel good, but it's not the most productive or helpful kind to prevent those people from re-abusing or future people from being abusive. We've seen that like a lot of capital punishment doesn't do like what we want it to do in terms of deterring people. So that would be, I mean, it's just for like the fulfilling justice of it for ourselves, which is a very selfish and kind of inefficient way of going about things. If you know.
I want to. Oh, sorry. You can
no,
go.
go
You put
Smith,
your
and
hand up.
then Smith, and then we can
Okay.
hear from.
I've wanted to say this for a while.
Joey, if you want in, just let me know, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I think that I'm not, I don't think that you shouldn't, like, if someone abuses you, if someone killed my dog, I would hate them. I would want to hurt them. I would want to just burn. I would want to torture them for like months. I would want them to go through the worst. And I think that because someone didn't kill my dog, I think that you have to protect the person from, like, so if I want to do that to somebody, you have to protect them from me. And I think that like we were saying, like, being abused and being hurt gives us a tendency to want to hurt people back. And that doesn't make it the right thing to do. And just because it feels good to hate people, or and we want to, feel that's not a productive feeling. It's okay to feel that, but we need to protect people from that.
So I have a response for you, Rora, for you, Smith, and for you, 𝕵𝖎𝖎. 𝕵𝖎𝖎. So you mentioned, for instance, like that those that have been abusive, those that are, well, I won't say that have been abusive, those who are abusers. So, and again, like as I stated before, the definition that I'm using for that is those who would legally meet the definition for those who could be prosecuted for abuse. The problem that I have, even though I would agree with you that rehabilitation can be effective and does show to use recidivism, the problem that I have with that, though, is that the effective models that we have for rehabilitation require the abuser to take accountability. So I think that there's an idea that we might have what rehabilitation might look like. For a lot of people, they think it means substance abuse, addiction treatment. That has the potential to be abused, right? So an example of that, when Harvey Weinstein was arrested, he was spent to a spa-like facility that specialized in sex addiction treatment, even though that technically doesn't go underneath the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. There's no such thing as sex addiction, right? When Ted Bundy was arrested, and he had an interview with Dobson, and he talked about being addicted to pornography, right? We have all of these different examples of people who will make allusions to having an addiction problem of some kind, of needing to be rehabilitated for an addiction of some sort, and it turns out that most of the time the addiction
Let me
they're
ask you
talking about
directly
isn't
then,
well-founded.
because I
Yes.
don't know if you're answering my question, right? And I'm curious. Do you think that the Catholic priest that you mentioned earlier, you got very emotional about it, right? What if not jail or rehabilitation? Do you side with vigilante? Do you think they should have been K-worded? That they should
No.
receive the
Um,
death penalty?
So
Okay.
my position, although in spirit I agree with vigilante, the reason why I disagree with vigilante is not because I don't think that there are some people who deserve to die. It is because I do not believe that the state should ever be entrusted with that power to decide who should live or who should die. I do not believe in capital punishment based off of that series. That doesn't mean I also don't think that we as private citizens have the right to commit vigilante justice and to go and to kill somebody, right? Because we have chosen as part of a social contract to live in a society and to live by the rules of the society. So while in spirit I agree with vigilante, practically speaking, living in the society that we do, I cannot.
Can I ask you a similar question, like a follow-up to that? If rehabilitation, it seems like you just don't have any faith in rehabilitation, which is fair if you don't think there's much faith to be had, right? But am I right or wrong?
You're wrong. I do.
Okay.
Yes. What I'm saying is rehabilitation, the type of rehabilitation that works for offenders, is not what you think it is. It's not psychotherapy. It's not substance abuse counseling. It's not sex addiction treatment. It's not couples counseling. It's not anger management. It's typically cognitive behavioral therapy, abuser specialized programs. So an example of this
Right.
would be the risk responsivity model. And what we find is that other models of trying to work with offenders, like the Good Lives model, even though it has been embraced by many facilities, there's not nearly as much empirical data or research to back it up. The risk responsivity model has shown to be far more effective in treating offenders. And another example, another resource I could point you towards that proves that that's the case, that you have to hold offenders accountable, would be 𝕍𝖎𝖙 versus Same Now. And that's a bit old. It was published in about 1974.
Well, what do you mean when you say hold a, like, because so this is what I'm trying to get at. So when you say hold a, like, so you are pro rehabilitation, you just want to do it right, right?
Yes, but I think that when you use the word rehabilitation, I think that it has connotations in most people's minds that it doesn't actually contain, at least when we're specifically talking about sex offenders, people that have committed to domestic violence. So there's
Then should we focus
abuser
on like
specialist
making
program is
sure that
different
people
than
have a
couples
more
therapy.
accurate knowledge of what actually does work and what doesn't, so that we can focus on implementing more programs like the ones that do actually work, like group therapy. That I've seen is pretty successful. Group accountability therapy, where they go through and seeing it in other people and correlating it with themselves, apparently seems to work pretty well. Why wouldn't we advocate for more of that and more knowledge of that, rather than just like demonizing the whole spectrum, basically?
Well, I would advocate for more knowledge of that, and I would advocate for more education to be brought into students especially and into the public on what abuse is and what it means to be an abuser. But the problem is that when you talk and give that education and when you bring people to be held accountable, I'm afraid that you are going to have to ask people to demonize at least a little bit more than they're used to in their everyday lives.
What do you
So
mean?
So what I mean by that is oftentimes within family systems, so this is a familiar story that many people might have in their own families. They might have an abusive relative, somebody older, somebody that has the most money or the most power in that family, who sexually abuses a smaller, younger family member, and then the rest of the family members cover it up, and they don't say anything. And they tell the younger child never to talk about what happened to them. The older relative is still allowed to come to Thanksgiving. They're still allowed to come to Christmas parties. They're still allowed to come to family reunions every summer. That is not demonization. So even if I understand when we say demonization, I know that when we go to Twitter or when we go to Instagram, and even when we like read books, I realize that might be out in the world. But practically speaking, the statistics state very, very clearly, Vigilante's example of the fact that we don't prosecute, and even when we do prosecute offenders, they usually don't go to jail, and it's very difficult to prove. In our interpersonal lives, how often it is that in our family systems, there's a lot of covering up of abuse, particularly child sexual abuse. And for that reason, I think that it's extremely important to point it out. And I'll give you an example for me. So I work as a teacher. So this is part of the reason why it's important to me. I am what's called in our community a mandated reporter. So if I suspect that I have a teenager in my classroom who is being abused, I have a responsibility mandated to me by the state to immediately pick up the phone and to call CPS. Now, this is why this has something to do with our conversation. This is, and the source that I'm using for this is a book by 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙. It's called Teenage Sex and Pregnancy Unsexy Realities. You can look it up. It revealed a surprising statistic that a large amount of teenage girls that become pregnant, they do not, it's not from a liaison with another teenage boy. It's with an adult man. A lot of teenage pregnancies that occur are often connected to abuse that happens to them from an older male family figure or from an older male figure who promises to buoy them out of poverty. So So when these girls come into my classroom, and if I have a girl like that, that girl doesn't believe that she's being abused. And she doesn't believe that the 32-year-old man who she's quote unquote dating is abusing her. She believes that they're going to be married someday, that they're going to have a family, that they're going to have a very nice environment to live in. And for me to pick up that phone and call, it's not what the victim wants. The victim in that moment does not want me to call and tell her parents. She doesn't want me to call CPS. But when I pick up that phone and make that phone call, it's not about what she individually personally wants. It's about my responsibility as a mandated reporter. And that's why I'm insisting on demonizing, and I think that necessarily for a lot of people, that means explaining that what happened to them or what goes on in their everyday family lives is unacceptable. And that's why I have to be on this side of the issue.
Okay, I find it very unfortunate because I like wholeheartedly fully agree with everything you're saying. But I find it unfortunate that I'm very passionate about drawing a distinction between demonizing and holding people accountable. And I find it unfortunate because you're extremely articulate and you're like the perfect warrior for the cause. And now I'm pinned to fight against you.
Let me try, if I may. So I understand what you're saying, and I'm just gonna put my thumb on the scale a little bit here. Apologies. Fairy Queen, do you think that one of the reasons that people fail to recognize when they're being abused is because we have conflated the word abuse to mean so many different things that do not fall under that level? So when someone says, I have been abused, I cannot tell if their abuse is someone was mean to me on the internet, like someone sent me a mean DM or a mean tweet, or if someone punched them in the face repeatedly. I have to find out. And because we have overspread this word so thin, it has been a cover for actual demonic abusers to do the things and get away with the things we do. And that, I would argue, is a result of the over-demonization of abusers and the conflation of abuse to mean so many different things, because we've decided, hey, this person I don't like, if I can paint them out to be an abuser, right? If I can paint them out as abusive, it has all these societal connotations, right? That they are a demon, right? And so it becomes harder to deal with the actual issue because we have painted everything as demonic abuse instead of what we should do, and simply stick to this is abuse, right? This should, right, be held accountable, but I'm a bad person, so I'm never going to drill with it. I'll let you get into that, and I want Rora to go, and if anyone else has a chance, then go ahead. So respond,
I
Fairy,
100%.
and... Oh,
I
Rora.
agree with Fairy Queen, like 100%.
Oh.
Like like what Smith said. Like foundationally, like everything that Fairy Queen's saying is great. It's just that the angle of the demonization, and I just wanted to bring up a point that kind of sparked in my head, and that's why my hand raised. Fairy Queen brought up how people will literally use past abuse as an excuse to abuse. And I think also it goes kind of the other way as well, right? I think people weaponize abuse and accountability and demonization of it to harm people who haven't actually abused. So I think that we should kind of take those things and set them to the side, because no matter what we do in this world, people are going to use tools to get their way and screw people over or lie and get away with stuff. So I don't think those are useful examples to the overall conversation. That's all I wanted to add. That's it.
I also wanted to chime in on that front of like, so specifically with like families, and you were talking about abusers still come to family gatherings, family dinners, et cetera, et cetera. I do think under some circumstances it's better to remove them entirely just for the safety of people. But also if we're talking about hopefully preventing people from reoffending, having support systems is not the lack of support systems is a huge cause of people falling back into their previous habits and reoffending. So we need to find a balance between like completely cutting people off entirely and then like actually giving them room to grow while still keeping the people who are vulnerable safe.
So I apologize. I'm trying to remember what everyone has said. So I will try to respond to everyone as best as I can. So I will agree that the word abuse is used too liberally. I think is why I very specifically stated, like at the beginning of my conversation, I'm talking about legally actionable things. So when I'm talking about abuse, I'm referring to the CDC website's definition of
Sure,
intimate
but
partner.
that's not what anyone else means, right?
Mhm.
Like, I understand that you, like, I get it that you want to keep it at that level, but you have to understand when you say abuse, what people hear, right,
Mhm.
is, oh, that time someone was mean to me on the subway, right?
But I think that's an
Well,
issue with an educational issue. That's an issue of educating the public on what abuse really is and what it really is to be an abuser. That's within the realm of the school systems and within the realm of public health, right?
Well, hold on. Wait, we kind of agreed that what I said that I did is abusive. That doesn't make me an abuser. But I think
Well,
like if I had not been had my mind opened to like being willing to admit that I'm abusive, like if I had demonized abuse in such a way and only saw it as extremes, I would not have been receptive to that criticism. And I'm so glad that I was.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. And I think that this whole conversation is an overall example of how sort of the extremes go. And then it doesn't allow us to talk about everything in between. And that's sort of where I'm going, as I don't disagree with the extreme examples and how we necessarily handle them. But what I'm talking about is all the fudge in the middle, that we need to sort of address and understand that there's nuance to. And I find that when we go to these extreme examples and the CDC and all of that, we're sort of not allowing the real batter, to mix here. And that's what I believe is that, there's a lot of nuanced, very, smaller examples over time of abuse that can be very serious. And I think that, for example, in the past, when I realized I was being abusive through therapy and different things, I Googled to find resources, and I found it very hard to seek help when there were a lot of like, if you're abused, seek help and blah, blah, blah. And there weren't, at the time, I'm not saying now, but at the time, there were not a lot of resources for me as someone who was trying to like figure it out, because everything out there was, as you were stating, right? And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that there's a lot of smaller examples, like Smith said, where you may be abusive, but you may not necessarily be an abuser. And I think, a big, indicator of that is whether or not someone is genuinely, and I'm not saying BSing, I'm saying genuinely willing to work through it and get better.
how do we tell the difference?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I keep cutting you off, Fairy Queen. I apologize.
Mm,
But
I'm going to take a step back. I think, Joey, you had something that you
Yeah,
wanted to
I was
say.
Go ahead, Joey.
No,
Yeah.
I just think it's important to realize also that abusers are not just these people that come up from the swamps like some sort of monster, abuse at certain given times, and then kind of like drift away into the darkness. You know, the thing is like the reason why I'm on the side of that we over demonize abusers is more for the victims. Okay, like there's a tool that is like a John beat Mary, right? So it's a complete sentence, and then you have Mary was beaten by John, and then Mary was an abused victim. Mary is a surviving victim of domestic violence, right? So basically, what ends up happening is the reason why I'm again on the side of over demonization is that when we over demonize, we lose the abuser. We end up with a victim where we've noticed in the past that there's been a lot of hatred towards of victims, victim blaming, and granted we're kind of going past that, but yeah, like
I get what you're trying
it's
to
just
say.
yeah, like it's just important that one, we already know that the justice system is failing, right? One thing about domestic violence, your first assault is usually a misdemeanor. That is no jail time. That is 1 year probation. And then usually the only way that it is considered a felony is if there is a felony act to be, attached to it. Because you can even go into the second charge for family violence assault. And so I agree with Fairy that as far as the justice system, as far as the rehabilitation methods that we have so far, they do not show what the victims are possibly going through. It is more of an accountability for the abuser, where are they really kind of acknowledging what effect that they have? Are they acknowledging the trauma that's going to persist for their victim's lifetime? A lot of us in here have been, sadly enough, like on the other end of, where we've been victims, where at points we've been abusers. But I think that when we talk about how we've over-demonized, it's more on the victims, where there has been a lot of silencing. There's been a lot of backlash when people actually stand up. I think that as far as a society, we need to acknowledge when someone is being an abuser, acknowledge that bad behavior. Then the other question is, when do we start? When do we start advocating for the children? Should we teach what not to deal with, like as far as like this is A through Z could be abuse at a younger age, because we can't rely on the justice system, and a lot of families have are coming from broken homes to start. So so I don't know, maybe my question to 𝕵𝖎 or anybody else who's advocating for it, where do we start? Where do you see if we can do or come up with a rehabilitation system that works? Would you be for the rehabilitations, or do you think we need harsher punishment?
Okay,
I think
before we go, I got 2 super chats I need to read. Okay, got to make my money. And gang, if you want to comment on this, pay me money, give me money, super chats. You stop abusing me by taking my content for free. Okay, so 𝕵𝖎𝖙 for $5. The same form of emotional abuse can have different impacts on different people. Do we define abuse from the victim's point of view or from the other side? And then Fondue for another $5 says, people in society will use any word with a negative stigma for political or social gain. I don't think it is fair to say these stigmas shouldn't exist. Okay, thank you for the money, gang. But first of all, I want people to, before you go, Smith, and before you go, Aurora, I'm curious for Vigilante and Fairy Queen and Pep to answer the question. At what point, right, do we get involved, right, as a society to start demonizing? Where do you say that's enough? So I'll got a specific question for you. A woman and a man are out in a restaurant. They get into an argument. The woman punches the man in the face, right? Just gets mad. Bam! Socks him. Should she go to jail with a felony charge for that, and for how long?
My answer is yes. If you punch somebody, if you disturb somebody else's bodily autonomy, I don't care if it's a woman punching a man. I don't care if she's 110 pounds and he's 250 pounds. That's abuse, and it should be actionable by law. As far as how long she should go to jail, truly, I'm not an expert. Everything that I've read so far about abuse is based off of the books that I've read, but I don't know specifically how long that person should go to jail for. I think that's a question that comes from the court system based off of legal precedent. So I would have to defer to what the
Joey mentioned it's a misdemeanor the first time.
Yeah, first account would be, if it's a couple, first account would be considered a misdemeanor.
Do you think that should be changed to a felony?
Yes, I do.
Okay. What about you, Vigilante? Do you think it should be changed to a felony?
I do. Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
I think first account makes sense that not. I think a pattern of behavior is more like serious. So I'm just very anti prison in general. I think I want to solve the problem. I don't want to like enact revenge. And whatever solves the problem is good for me. And I don't think we have a system really set up to do that. So my opinion here really is not really but what I wanted to say a second ago is that I think that in order for someone to be reformed, and just on a using our time efficiently, we're going to want to be reforming people, not just locking everybody away. And if we want people to be reformed, they have to admit that they are abusing people, which is important. That she, what is your name? Fairy Queen just said earlier. And I think that if you want people to admit that they are doing harm, I think that we need to hold them accountable 100%. But I don't think we should demonize them. I don't think we should dehumanize them. We should allow them to say, I'm a human, but I mean, I'm hurting people.
I like dehumanize. I
No.
just wanted to say that. I like that versus demonize. That's a.
Wait, you
like
would rather dehumanize than demonize? Can you
I
explain the
like the
difference?
use of that term versus demonize because it implies a lot more. It's more
So
descriptive.
you would just so I'm understanding what you're trying to say.
I
you
agree with
said-
the use of it more.
Yes.
Versus demonize. in this
She's saying
situation.
Yeah.
she's saying the thing
Demonizing
that she
is
disagrees
dehumanizing.
with.
Yeah.
She says the thing that she disagrees with is dehumanizing. It's a good
Got you.
articulation of
Okay.
the thing she.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Barry, go ahead.
So I would disagree that sending someone to jail for physically or sexually and by psychological aggression, again, it goes by what the standard is. So stalking, threatening to kill someone's pets, sending death threats over the phone. I'm talking about it like in a legally actionable sense when I'm talking about emotional abuse. Even though I acknowledge that there are toxic behaviors that are unacceptable, that are emotionally horrible to do. That's not what I'm talking about. Legally actionable. What I would say to you, though, like you said, for instance, that it dehumanizes somebody to send someone to jail for treating this way. I would fundamentally disagree with you. I think
That's not what
that
I'm saying.
Well, if we can clarify, I apologize.
I don't. It's not that sending the. I'm just an anti-jail kind of. It's not very productive with my stance on prison.
Okay, so just basically,
I'm anti. I'm anti. Telling them that they should hate themselves and telling everybody that we should hate them. I think what we should tell everybody is we need to stop them. It's unacceptable, and we need to stop them. It's like whatever we have to do to make it stop. It has to stop. We cannot put up with this. But I don't think that means we need to see them as inhuman.
Well,
I want to chime in a little bit on that just because I do think it's important for people to have some shame around those things. Like, you can be upset at yourself when you realize you're an abuser. You have to like have that insight and be like, wow, I really don't fucking want to be this. I think that can be a little bit productive towards like pursuing growth. But I also agree that like it shouldn't be like so bad that people are unwilling to identify themselves with it. Fuck, I had something else I was gonna say, but I forgot. Go to somebody else. It's fine.
Very Queen, go ahead.
So very well. So your particular position, as I understand it, Smith, is you are just anti-jail in general. And you don't want people to hate themselves, or you don't think that people that have committed, well, you are talking about abuse in a different way than I am. I'm talking about legally actionable things. You're talking about interpersonal toxic behaviors, right? So
Right.
Would you agree with me, though, that somebody that commits a legally actionable sense of abuse, so if we're talking about somebody that commits child rape, do you think that that still applies for that person as opposed to, say, like a couple that has a very toxic argument?
I actually do. I think that we need to stop that behavior by all accounts, and maybe I like obviously they do need to be ashamed of themselves in order to grow in some way. But I just don't feel I have no faith in the theory that having this demonization culture helps support that. I think having like promoting morals and saying like what you're doing is wrong and you're hurting people. We have to put you away. We have to lock you. Like it's like when you have to lock the puppy in the other room because they kept pooping on the floor or whatever. It's like you should be ashamed because we literally have to remove you from society because you're hurting people.
Well, I would so I understand what you're saying, but I would disagree, and this is why. And this is, I think, what I was trying to say. When we hold people accountable, when we say that what you have done is monstrous and you deserve to be punished for it, and you have done something so unacceptable within the bounds of society, that's not dehumanizing someone. That is treating somebody else as an equal moral agent. To talk to somebody as if they are not incapable of making their own moral decisions, incapable of controlling somebody, is to speak to somebody else as though they were not a free moral agent to make their own adult decisions, right? So I disagree with the characterization of it's like the puppy that poops on the floor that needs to learn by being put in the jail cell. I think that takes away the human individual agency that you have as a person to make decisions in your everyday lives. And I actually think that it's more respectful in some cases to punish and to use retributive justice, even though I would agree with you that there are many methods of rehabilitation that do work for people who are offenders. It's more respectful because it treats you as a responsible moral agent in that instance. Somebody that doesn't need to be instructed, somebody that doesn't need to be told what to do. You can make up your own mind as an individual person, right?
But the thing that I'm not disagreeing about the respect, but what I'm saying is it's lacking any compassion. But like in the example that you said before, with like within a family unit where one person is like abusing a child and nobody's doing anything about it, nobody wants to admit it. And you're saying that they have to be able to hold that person accountable and they have to be able to admit it. Like that completely is 100% true. But I think that it's so much harder and it's so much more of an ask to tell them that this person is like despicable, than it is for them to be like, this is unacceptable and you need to be I just, we don't have to hate you. Like it should feel, it's a tragedy to have to put your like father in prison because he's abusing your sister. It's like it's an awful tragedy.
Let me ask. Okay, I know I'm jumping in a lot here, but I think it's important to get to the heart of this, right? Because I don't know if we should be arguing, well, should we have harsher sentences? Because that's not what we're talking about at the end of the day. What we're and I know this is partially my fault. I get it. I understand. I'll take accountability, right? Because I asked you what do you think sentences should be. But after someone has served whatever sentence we think they should have, right? And they get back into society, do we disagree that they are demonized, shunned, lack support systems, that they, by society, are treated as monsters, and that because of this, at least partially because of this, the recidivism rate in this country, America especially, is sky high? Prison doesn't work.
I want to respond to Smith before I respond
sure.
to you, Wick, if that's okay. I'm not trying to skip over it. So, Smith, this is what I would say to you with your example. So, if an abuse victim wants to feel that the person that abused them isn't despicable and they want to forgive them and they want to view them in a nuanced and compassionate light, that is between them and God. That is between them, and that's their own personal business, whether or not they want to seek reconciliation with the person that abused them. But we as a community, as families, as school systems, have no moral right to forgive an abuser on behalf of the person that has been abused. There's a quote
I'm not saying forgiveness.
Well, talking about saying that they're despicable and that what they did was despicable, and that is a type of softening and forgiveness, even though we're not exactly using the word
unacceptable.
Well, fair enough. I would say that unacceptable and despicable are, in this particular context, the same thing. We're talking about somebody, for instance, we're talking about, like, again, the legally actionable standard. We're talking about people that have committed horrible acts of domestic violence. For you as a mother to not be angry and to not view, say, an older family member hurting your child, to not view that person as despicable afterwards, it's dangerous for your child.
That's not what I'm saying.
Individually.
No, you should be angry. Like, honestly, it makes much more sense for the family to actually be angry. But I was just trying to give an example of how, like, the fact that if the people won't admit that this person is abuser, the fact, the thing that's keeping them from admitting this person is abuser is because they have this attachment. They should be angry. That's okay. I think that they should be angry, and I think that we can't take that away from them. But I think as a society, we don't have to be those. Like, we should be dispassionate and look at it objectively and try to actually solve the situation.
So I would respond to you with a source from this. I think it's called the Stop Campaign of Abuse. It talks specifically about family members, and I can actually send the link in chat a little bit later. And one of the reasons that are listed, it's not attachment. attachment is not the primary reason. The primary reason why family members do not report older family members for committing abuse, one of the reasons has to do with money. It has to do with access to resources. Normally, the people that get away with it are usually the wealthiest examples of the family, and usually it's to make sure that they don't lose power within the community. So an example of that would be the Murdaugh case, right? The Murdaugh murders. When the family swooped in to cover up what that boy, when he killed that girl in the boat, they did it because they were worried about losing public face within the community. They were worried about losing access to resources in that case, right? So number one, it's resources. Number two, usually they're not the only person who's being abusive. There are normally multiple examples of other abusers that are in the family. So other people don't want to admit the fact that this person has been abusive, not because of an attachment, but because they didn't do anything. They now have become possibly an accomplice to rape, right? Now they perhaps might go to jail because they didn't say anything. Or it might be the case that they participated. If not in covering up, then they might actually be active abusers themselves. So it's not simply merely attachment. It's the consequences, the legal consequences, the financial consequences, and the social consequences that come afterwards. Say anything.
I want to give space for
I believe
other,
you.
Yeah, I want to give space for some other people to get in here. I'm liking the back and forth, but I just want to give some space. So go ahead. Joey, if you want to say something, then I want to go to
I have a
Prep,
question.
and
So
Ron.
do you think that as a society, if we thought or we implemented that certain criminal abusive acts were despicable, would that work better if we considered criminal abusive acts as unacceptable?
Who is the
I'm
Two different
question
things.
to? Is it to Smith or to Fairy Queen?
I'll ask it to Fairy.
I'm not sure what it is, the difference you mean between unacceptable and despicable. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I know that we get a general connotation of the difference. I need a concrete example of what the difference is between something unacceptable and something despicable in the context of this conversation. I think I would turn it back to you to explain to me what the difference between those two things, and not in a general way, in a concrete way. Like, does that mean a lighter sentencing? Does that mean a higher bar for sending a child molester to jail? Does it mean on my level that when I see somebody being abused, I don't pick up the phone? Does it mean that a nurse, when they suspect somebody is being abused,
That's not how I asked it. That's not how. So I'm just saying, as a general, like in society, if we could use two of the forms, whether certain criminal, because I know we keep on going on to the criminal acts of abusers. If we could see all abuse or criminal acts of abusers as despicable, which I would probably go more for, that's more of the demonization, or unacceptable, right? Where I would say that it would hold more people as a general society accountable. So do you think that either or would work better? Because if you're if you're more for more harsher crime or punishments, I'm not sure exactly what you're for, but which one do you think would work better? In which society would you, or do you think that we would have less abusers?
I can't answer that question for two reasons. One, I don't know what you mean when you say society. Again, I know we have a general vibe of what that means. What does it specifically mean? Judicial system? Schools?
She means socially.
No, that means you mean interpersonally with friends and family, like in our own social circles. So what
she's
does that
asked,
mean?
I think that I'm curious what your answer for in social circles is, right?
Yeah.
So in social circles, none of us are legislators, I don't believe, and none of us are in the judicial system, I don't believe, but we're all in each other's interpersonal social circles. And so if I find out, for example, that, let's say, I'm sorry, Smith, right, did something terrible 10 years ago. 10 years ago, he did something unconscionable, something very bad. But he has served his time. He has been through the system. He was punished for it. And now he is released. As the judicial level and legislative level, his slate is now clean. This is, there are some things he can't do as a felon, right, et cetera, but let's put that aside for now, right? How should I treat him? He served his time. He's been punished for his actions. Should I still demonize him?
I feel like offenders of certain types of crime should be kind of treated a little bit like alcoholics, maybe, where you kind of have to trust but verify a little bit. Like if you see your alcoholic friend in a bar, you're gonna be like, "You are you sure you good? You want to be here?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, no problem." Like that's there has to be some nuance there because of course you do have to protect people like children, vulnerable people, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the reason that people do offend is due to like we were talking
But
about
Pep,
earlier,
Pep,
just like
Pep, Pep, Pep,
yeah,
I think you're missing it, right?
am I?
I think you are, and let me explain why.
What am I missing? Yeah.
Sure,
Mhm.
sure. So, I'm not talking about whether or not I should keep Smith away from the things that caused him to offend in the first. That's not what demonizing means to me. What I
Okay.
like, should I exclude him from my social circle entirely because he has done a terrible thing in the past that he went through, he was held accountable for by the legal system, and he is done? Should I not be friends with him?
I
I'm
think
I
not
that
think
talking
there's
about
that
keep
another.
him
There's
out
another.
of the
Wait,
alcohol system,
really
like
quick.
bar.
I think
That's
I think
just
there's
real
a
quick.
word
But
we're
I
missing
wanna,
here. There's a
that's- Pep,
pivotal
Pep,
word.
Pep, I want
The
I want
word is
Pep to
the word
answer
is
my
hate.
question.
The word is hate. Should you hate me?
That's a
yeah.
good
I
question
think
too. Pep, go ahead.
I think there has to be nuance here. I think it really greatly depends on the crime. Obviously, for like really heinous things, there's no forgiving that. But I think that
Give me an
also,
example of that, please.
like child, like rape of an infant and distributing child porn. Like I would have a hard time forgiving somebody for that because I
Well,
feel like
what about domestic violence? What about someone who beat their wife for a
that
year?
okay. So this is the thing. This is what I was going to say was I think on the left we have like a huge problem with not allowing room for growth. I think we're happier to be like fuck this person into the sun forever. Like we're fucking done with them, and that disallows like any potential like change or growth. And so I think people can change in certain aspects. So yeah, for domestic violence, I feel like it would really again it would still depend, but I would be more open. Oh yeah, you went to a bunch of like group accountability, realize that you have a problem. Okay, cool. Like yeah, I'd be tentatively fine with that person.
Okay, curious. Vigilante, please.
I generally agree with Pep. I mean, with domestic violence specifically, I mean, it would be kind of like what she said earlier about the trust but verify. But with like people who committed sexual abuse, uh, distributing child porn, etc. Uh, yeah, definitely those people that would be just excommunicate from society, excommunicate from friends, group, etc.
Well, this makes sense with your execution stance, right? It
Yeah,
tracks, right? um,
I mean, fair.
no, I mean fair because that's the question, right? If you think there is a sin that is so great that is unforgivable and no one should ever and they should never be reintegrated back into society, why are you against the death? Like I know Fairy Queen, you explained it because you don't trust the state with that power, but conceptually, death or exile, right? I mean, that would be the answer. If we aren't going to at some point forgive someone, why not?
Yeah.
Do we
Yeah, I
agree with
mean,
that? I find that I personally find that very frightening.
Yeah.
Only
I find that
only
frightening.
yeah, just real quick. I'll let you go. But on a conceptual level, like maybe this is my religious upbringing, right? I was raised in a very religious household. I grew up religious, and the idea of forgiveness, right, was very important. And it's still important to me. That is one thing that I have transitioned as I've transitioned to be less religious. I have carried with me because I think that the concept of forgiveness has so many benefits, both not only to society but to on a personal level as well, right? Holding a grudge is like drinking poison and hoping someone else dies. It's not gonna hurt them. Um, but at the same time, right? Like I understand that there are some things we can never treat a person the same, but that's a different question than there some things that someone should, if you do them, you are no longer human. That's what we're asking here. That's the question. And I understand that there's a big bullet to bite that even those people who have committed sexual acts against minors 50 years ago should never be forgiven. That's a brave stance to take. I mean, everyone takes that. But at the same time, I don't know. I don't know if that's actually true. I'm not sure. Smeth, go
I
ahead.
think
Then I want to hear
I,
from
I
Laura.
the thing that scares me about that, the thing that scares me about that is the implication that it has about yourself. Because I don't think that anybody is free from sin, and I think that to hate people and dehumanize people means you're cutting out a piece of yourself. And even though like maybe you're like you haven't done nearly anything to nearly the same degree, to hate that about them means that you're both ignoring that potentiality within yourself to be that person, which is there and horrifying. And you to ignore that makes it more likely to happen. And like you're just it just makes the whole world stupider to follow hate, and makes us all more self-loathing and blind to ourselves.
Go ahead, Roy.
I think extreme emotional reactions, and I'm not labeling it as an extreme necessarily because we might feel a negative way towards something that is a very bad act. I do agree that there are some things that are certainly unforgivable. I just think that as a society and as a whole, a lot less people are going to be willing to recognize that they are abusers and want to get help. I mean, I saw Wick do a stream about people who are fear being institutionalized for seeking help for their mental health. And I think this sort of goes along the lines of that. And I do think that a lot of people truly fear seeking help for their own behaviors because of extreme responses. And I just want to I guess, ask a question. Do we think that victim blaming, like extreme victim blaming, is sort of tied to the heavy stigma around abuse? Don't we think that, like, if maybe abuse was if we just approach it more nuanced? I'm not saying that we need to forgive everyone or anything, and it's not up to us, like, how people forgive their abusers, right? Granted, for some people, it's better and more healthy to forgive your abusers. For other people, it's more healthy to be angry about that and to be more productive in that way. It depends on where you come from and your displacement before. But I just think as a society, maybe like victim blaming and things like that wouldn't be an issue if we sort of looked at this as a more a nuanced sort of thing. And I find that, like, I don't disagree with Fairy Queen at all on a lot of her points. And I think they're very valid, and I agree on a lot of fronts. But I find that when we talk about abuse and then we constantly go, what is legally actionable? Then we are really kind of turning our nose up to a lot more detailed and constructive conversation around what that really can be for a lot of people. And I'm not talking about watered down versions either. I'm talking about legitimate long-term emotional abuse, physical abuse. And physical abuse can be as small as shoving someone over. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean you have to raise your hand at someone. So that's what I have to say.
Speaking of raising their hand at someone, Fairy Queen, go ahead.
Rora, I can only cite the book that, and I can cite personal experience as well, but I won't do that on stream. But I can cite the book that I read. Pushing somebody and like tapping somebody in the face like that is legally actionable. And actually, a lot of you would be surprised at how many, like even the smaller things that most people would not consider to be legally actionable, that they don't think would be legally actionable, can be.
But is emotional abuse legally actionable?
That
like,
I don't know. I don't know, but I don't know. It depends on what you mean when you say emotional abuse. I don't know. I can't tell you. So I would have to do more data and research to find out. I can tell you that you would be surprised at the sorts of things that count as sexual abuse or count as physical abuse that can be prosecuted. If you go up to a random stranger, you poke that person in the cheek, you can go to jail for that. It's the same reason why if you spit on a police officer, you can go to jail.
But I find still we're going to extreme examples here. And we're not talking.
This is not an extreme example. That is spitting on.
I am talking specifically about emotional abuse. I'm asking a question. How do we you're saying what's actionable? Emotional abuse is huge. Like I personally, I'll speak honest and true. I've been beaten very badly. Like my jaw, it clicks when I open my mouth. I've been beaten very badly. I've also been emotionally abused for years. And I used to wake up every day with my ex-husband and say, I wish he would just hit me in the face every day. So I think that emotional abuse in some instances, I'm not saying always, because obviously people can be disfigured, right? There's a lot of examples where it can be extreme. But I'm saying that I think emotional abuse on a long-term scale, I have diagnosed CPTSD. I've worked through that. I'm doing well now. But I think that is long-term, very harmful. And I think a lot of people, if we sort of go oh, this direction or this direction in abuse. When we're talking sort of in this, I'm obviously kind of laying in the center here a bit. I think that if we kind of ignore the center and sort of go to these extreme examples, there's a lot of people who are being abused emotionally who may not realize it, but also not only may not realize it, but may not realize they're also being abusive. So I just think that the directions we go in with these abuse topics are sort of predictable. And I think if we sort of just said, how can we think differently here? Then I think it would be more constructive. Is that fair?
Yeah, thank you, Good Path Quick Travel, for the gift sub. Thank you, Medium Juicer, for the sub earlier. Really appreciate the support, gang. A question before you respond. Well, no, just respond. I'll save my question for later. Go ahead.
So I guess my response to you, so first of all, the physical abuse, obviously that would be legally actionable, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to go through something as horrible as that. I do have some other experiences, but again, I won't just discuss them on stream. But what I will say is I'm still not sure what the definition of emotional abuse is. And my suspicion is that the emotional abuse that you're describing, though I don't know and I don't have the details, my guess is that would be legally actionable too. That would go underneath the definition of a true threat, for instance. That's something that's legally actionable. So if you receive a threat that you believe could legitimately backed up, that's an example of an emotional abuse. Harassment, that's an example of emotional abuse, right? That is something that could be legally actionable, right? If somebody is constantly blowing up your phone with text messages and you've asked them to stop, that counts legally as harassment, even though it might be something that a lot of people have done. Now, I will agree with you that a lot of people do not recognize that what they have done is abusive and may not understand the fact that they have done what's abusive. But again, that is not because the problem with that is that behavior isn't demonized enough. They don't understand that it's wrong. And that education, it has to come from public health, and it has to come from public education. It goes back to these systems that talk about it. And so I reject the premise that when we're talking about legally actionable things, we're only talking about the extreme of the extreme of the extreme. There are many things that could be considered legally actionable that are not just somebody almost dies from a punch in the face.
I don't know that's true. I don't know that the reason that people don't consider these things abusive is because we don't overly demonize these things. What I think it is that we demonize abusers. No one can think of themselves as a demon, so they don't want to admit anything they've done could be abuse because they're not a monster, right? They aren't a demon. So what they do isn't monstrous, it couldn't be abuse. Whereas if we decoupled the monster and abuser, then more people would be able to admit and cop to like, okay, yes, I have engaged in these abusive behaviors. A good example is something that you mentioned earlier when you talked about those people who have families with abusers in them who are great and powerful. One of the reasons that you stated that a lot of people don't come forward about it is because they worry that they will be seen as accomplices and abusive too, and that will be actionable. And because of this fear, they stay silent because they don't want to be seen as helping the monster. They don't want to be seen as engaged in abusive behavior because they know what will happen, and so they keep silent and thus allow abuse to perpetuate. I think that is a large portion, if not the entirety, of the problem. Go ahead. And then I know Vigilante wanted to go too.
Okay. I'll go
and
after
I
him.
see you too, Pep. And again, gang, with the hands like down in the bottom that I can barely see. No, come on, alpha hands, gang. Alpha. Okay. I see you too, Smith. Go ahead. Fairy Queen, and then Vigilante, then Pep, then Smith. Go ahead.
I will wait. Did you ask that specifically to me, Wick, or should I let the others go? Okay, to me. Okay. My answer is I think that we just simply fundamentally disagree, Wick. I don't think that we can live in a society where we make something as heinous as child sexual abuse more acceptable, or something that is like more, or at the very least, easier for people to excuse, or easier for people to...
I'm not talking about making it acceptable. I'm talking about saying we need to decouple the idea between you're a monster and you're an abuser, because I think that pragmatically, what coupling these things has done is prevented people from acknowledging that they are abusers. Go ahead.
I think that fundamentally, when you communicate that somebody is an abuser, you are communicating that somebody is a monster. And I don't think that it will be possible for you to uncouple those two things without entering into a huge moral quandary. I mean, for instance, like, can somebody punch somebody in the face, beat somebody repeatedly, and move on. You asked the question earlier, Wick, like, can somebody like ever achieve forgiveness for something? In my personal view, I might be able to give forgiveness for something that happened to me. As a community, though, I don't think that we can ever be forgiving for something like that that happened to somebody else. And I think that that is the reason why I have to sit on this side of the fence.
I understand. I think that, and again, I know the rest of you want to get in here. I know it's your panel too, but this is a great conversation, and I want to be part of it. I think that, like, when it comes to the fundamental question, the quandary, as you say, is fundamentally, and I think this might be the difference. Can people change? That's the question. Can people change? Is the person you were 20 years ago your destiny? Is it the person you will always be? I say fundamentally no. I do not believe that. I think that is actually harmful to believe that. It traps people into a cycle, right? A cycle that they can never escape because society will never forgive them. So if they will never receive forgiveness, why should they change their behavior? If they
Because
will
fuck
never
it,
be
right?
different, right? Why would they ever try to be different? We have to allow off-ramps. This is a cycle of radicalization too. If we turn this into the politically, one of the things that the people who are in extremist groups tell to their cultists, their people, is that society will never accept you. You are damned. And you have only one choice, and that choice is to be with us forever, because you will never be accepted by society. You will never be accepted by the outside world. You will never be reintegrated into society. You have no choice. Who you were 20 years ago is who you will always be. So you will keep wearing that hood, mister. You are in it to win it. You can never change. That's my argument. Go ahead.
So I will bite the bullet. And even though I stated, and I still think it's true, the evidence is very clear that abuser specialized rehabilitation does work and does reduce recidivism for people that enter those programs. I will bite the bullet and say that I think that there are some particular conditions, a rare, very few amount of conditions, that I don't think can ever be fully rehabilitated or can ever be fully, they might be able to coexist in society, but I don't know if like the proclivities that they have that can ever be truly removed. So an example of that would be pedophiles. And that's separate from child molester, to be very, very clear. So not all child molesters are pedophiles, not all pedophiles are child molesters. So, but we are talking specifically about, in this instance, a pedophile who is caught convicted of molesting somebody. That's specifically what we're talking about. A person like that, somebody with a very particular paraphilia, is almost impossible to treat. It's almost impossible to, you can treat somebody to control their behavior. You can treat somebody to not act out sexually. You can try to help them find good coping mechanisms so that they don't act on their urges. But if you are somebody who is a pedophile, unfortunately, I think most of the data shows that that is what you are going to be for the rest of your life. The only hope for lack of recidivism that is the hope that you won't act out and abuse a child in that instance. Another case of a group of people that's notoriously difficult to treat are people with antisocial personality disorder. That's not to say it's not impossible. That's not to say that there aren't people in society that could be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder that don't work well. Like, for instance, there was the case of the psychiatrist who looked at the brain scans of all of these serial killers who were diagnosed with ASPD and found out that his brain scan was almost identical to all of these other brain scans. I can't remember what the title of the study is. Somebody can link it in chat. Like, I don't disagree that there are examples of people like that who can coexist in society. But that person will have that brain structure. That person will have antisocial personality disorder for the rest of their life. And they will have inclinations to behave on that. The only thing you can regulate is the behavior, not the actual
them on their
brain.
behavior. Let's judge them on their behavior, not their brain. Like, there's an error in what you said earlier about pedophiles, where you first made a distinction between people who have that proclivity and people who actually rape people, and then you said, but once you've actually raped people, we could maybe make it so that you're not raping people, but you always have that proclivity. So you're actually lying. Like, you actually are demonizing the proclivity, and you're not actually talking only about the behavior.
So I can respond to that. So in this specific instance of somebody who rapes a child, and after they have been caught, they will always want to rape children. There's nothing that you can do to stop them from wanting to rape. I mean, you can help them find coping mechanisms, but you can't actually change it. But secondly, for me personally, not everybody has this view. Everybody has different views on what makes a person you. For me, I think that all you are the things that you do. At the end of the day, you are the behavior that you choose to do. If you are a person that beats people, that abuses people, that rapes people, that is who you are. I do not believe in this idea of an essential, deep down, idea of the self that is separate from your behavior. I think that you are defined by the choices that you make in your life.
I want to get other
And so if
people
they
in.
change
Even...
how they,
Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
never mind.
No, you're
If they
up
change
next.
how they,
Pap, Vidge, then Smith. Go ahead.
I have like 3 things that I wanted to touch on. If they change how they behave, then wouldn't that mean they're defined by that now?
Yes.
Like there's plenty of, yeah, okay. Also, I was a little bit bothered by the fact that you started off a whole sentence or a whole statement being like, in some very rare edge cases, like there are people who can't be treated, and then have been making entirely like broader prescriptive statements based
You're
around
in
your
charge
feeling.
till I get back. I gotta use.
And I feel like
I will.
that's kind of a problem because that maligns everybody who in any way abuse them in the same like irredeemable, unfixable kind of category, and that's a problem. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think my response to you was like irredeemable to who and redeemable for what purpose, right? So you might
Functioning in
individually.
society.
What do we mean when we say society? Do we mean redeemable as in you can get your job back? Do we mean redeemable as in you get to
You
have
can
your
lead a normal
relationship
human
back?
life with like a job, relationships. You can be self-sustaining. You can form like friendships and bonds, things like that.
I think I need you to be a bit more specific. So, okay, so we're talking about you can be a normal person in society. So if I'm a person,
Yeah.
for instance, who's been convicted of rape, right? I am convicted of rape. I'm Harvey Weinstein. I go to jail. I'm not sure how long you go to jail for. I'm not sure what his sentencing is. Again, somebody can find that in chat or somebody can Google that and find it. I think it's 10 years. Am I right? He was sent for 10 years. Is that correct? Somebody can correct
I think it was like 21 years.
So
So it's shorter than that or longer than that?
no,
16 years.
It's 16 years? Okay.
16.
So I guess I would turn the question back to you. So we have Harvey Weinstein. He's served his time. He's gone to jail for 16 years, and then he comes back. Do you think that Harvey Weinstein, for instance, should be able to make movies and people should buy his films?
No, this actually
be
like
able to get made?
this goes into what I was talking about earlier about how like instead of just the like in the moment kind of like canceling, we need to do more long ability. Well, like who would alcoholics like maybe don't have them be like, and so maybe he shouldn't be in positions where he's in power, but still give him opportunities to like prove that he's not a piece of shit still. Like there needs to be nuance in the ability to do that.
I think that depends on, I mean, I think that that's the decision of the organization. So I won't
It
comment
is all going to
on.
be very nuanced. It's all going to depend on individual cases.
Well, I
how we
think,
choose
well,
to go.
it's going to depend on individual cases, but I guess what I'm trying to say, it also depends on like what you feel most comfortable with and what you think would be best for that institution. So the reason I
What do you think is
mentioned,
best for society?
no,
Yeah.
that's too vague. It's too
That's
vague
the-
to talk about. No, I reject that. So I think I agree. I know that it's fun to use the word society, but it's not something that we can actually apply a solution to, not easily. In order to apply a solution to actually solve a problem, you have to name the people that you want to make the change, right? If we're talking about, for instance, worrying about, what's a societal issue? I mentioned teenage pregnancy, right? If I wanted to say, okay, I want in this district, if I would like there to be lower rates of teenage pregnancy, right? How am I going to achieve that, right? I can talk about I would talk about Planned Parenthood. I would talk about the public schools. I would talk about access to welfare programs, to SNAP benefits. These are the institutions that I would name if I wanted to attack that problem, right? I'm asking for the same thing when we're talking about the question of
Aren't we
like,
lowering teen pregnancy by destigmatizing it and their ability to reach out for resources and information, though? Like, isn't that how we destigmatize or how we sort of like make that less prevalent? Is by making teens more comfortable to ask their parents for birth control or to go and seek it out on their own without their parents or anybody?
Well, actually, if the book that I read is correct, so I can link this book to you like later. The book that I read actually like characterizes a lot of teen pregnancy as actually precipitously gone down, and that's largely because of birth control. It's largely because of access to information about comprehensive sex education. And that access is not because of access in public school systems. It's not because it's because of the internet. It's because like you, like anybody else, or if you're like me and you're worried about something sexually, right? If you're looking for a new birth control thing, you go to WebMD, you go to the internet. And that's what I did when I was a teenager. It's what most teenagers do these days. So the discussion about like having that and feeling more comfortable to talk with your parents, Most of them don't. I'm sorry, we're getting really off topic. But
No,
I'll
no,
talk
it's
about.
fine. But
I
this
also
is
still had like a point that I wanted to make earlier too that I didn't quite get around to.
okay.
Should
Well,
I wait on that?
I'm sorry. I
I have,
know
like,
I
three
was
things
gone
to
for a
say.
moment, and I'm just jumping in. I know some people
Mhm.
want to get in here. So, okay, finish your statement, and then I wanna let Pep give her next thought, then Vidge, and then
So the biggest reason that Males gives within his book is poverty is the reason for teenage pregnancy, and that many teens who wish to become pregnant use it because they want to try to buoy themselves out of poverty, because they think the men that they become involved with will marry them. They're usually older. They take advantage of the girls, and they make it seem as though this is their way to get married, to have a family, and then you have a life after you leave. And he said that if you want to address the root causes of teen pregnancy, you have to address the root causes of poverty, and you have to put more resources into schools. So while I think it's important for teenagers to feel like they can talk to their parents about sex and can talk about their concerns, I think overwhelmingly many cases of teens that become pregnant often already don't have good relationships with their parents and often need access to more resources within their schools.
I was a very young person who married someone 20 years older than me, and he had money, more money than me. I came from poverty, right? And I would have to say, despite being 24 at the time, he was almost 20 years older than me. I was groomed, and I just have to say that from my perspective, and this is purely anecdotal, so obviously take this with a grain of salt, right? The way sort of abuse was approached, at least back then, this is a while ago, the way it was approached, and when I would try to bring it up to my husband at the time that he was emotionally abusive and that this was like I'm talking, I was stripped of my identity. I couldn't wear what I wanted. I was financially abused. Every cent I made was taken. Like, I'm talking coerced sexually. Like, there was no locks on any of the doors. I had no privacy. Like, I couldn't be like, if I changed clothes, I had to do it in front of him. Like, all kinds of stuff like that, right? And I'm not going to go into explicit detail. We're going to talk generally here. But what I'm saying is, when I would try to bring it up that I was being abused and approach and say, hey, this is it, on each instance, I wouldn't say widely, you're abusive. I would say, this is abusive, this is abusive, this is abusive. He would largely reject it. And I believe it was because he grew up in a Catholic family. I believe that the way abuse was looked at by him and his family was of an extreme sort of reaction. And there was no possible way that he could see himself as a monster. And I, at the time, also did not, and I don't think society at that point either had the tools to really discuss nuance in abuse, right? And that this can be. So I just think that it's more productive to understand that it's a scale rather than we're going to go here and we're going to go here. Again, I think that there are varying degrees. And I think, again, when we sort of speak about it from the perspective of, you know, I obviously, with all due respect, I just think you're kind of speaking in extremes, and I just don't think it's constructive.
Hey, Fondue, just real quick, $5 from Fondue to say, I don't think it's people's responsibility to know all the nuances of an abuser's life. They need to act on what info they have. Thank you. Thank you for the money.
I also want to say that
Go ahead. Pep.
what Rora was just saying is kind of like the point I wanted to make earlier. I think as a culture, we have a huge problem of kind of like black and white, good and evil thinking, like good side, bad side, them,
Dirty
us
testing.
kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. And I think that leads to, like you said, people being like, oh, that person's not a villain. They're not like a horrible demon. They're just like, and when people can do horrible shit who are normal ass. And so that does, like what she was saying, make it very hard for abusers to see themselves as the villain because we villainize it so much. But it also makes it very hard for people who are being abused to sometimes be like, oh yes, this person that I love and who I'm in a relationship, who I've spent years with, is an abuser, because you're like, no, my husband wouldn't do that. Like, I love him, he loves me. Like,
God-fearing, good guy, nice to everyone else in their life except the one person they're alone with at home.
Exactly. And so I think that the black and white thing damaging on both parties to everyone, basically.
So if I may respond, so I have a story that I would like to share with you. So this is the story. It is a true story. It happened in the parish church that was connected to the elementary school in which I went to high school. The elementary school where I went to, it was a parochial school, so it was a Catholic private school. I don't have children, but I do have younger siblings. They all went to that church, and they all went to the school that was associated with that church. And one of the main parish priests, and his name was Father Francis. And everyone loved Father Francis. Father Francis was a nice, friendly guy. He would high five all of the boys, usually about 12 to 13. He would play thumb war.
You're going to give us an example of when we should demonize someone. You're going to make us hate someone so that we can demonize
No, I'm
them.
not going
Like
to do
all
that.
the
I'm
other
going to
extreme
demonstrate
examples,
why it's,
yeah.
listen, just so you all know the way that the story ends. And he disappeared. Nobody knew why. The Archbishop called everybody to go into the church to listen to what happened and why he left. It was so packed, tons of people. He had 2 microphones, and he explained, and this is very specifically what he claimed. He claimed that Father Francis had sexually harassed 2 young men, and the young men, they were adults. They were in their early 20s, and he claimed for that reason, like, he had fled to Canada to avoid any other allegations of abuse. And there was a huge outcry in the community. One of the most surprising things that happened in that community was after a person that worked at Project Harmony. So she was a clinician that worked with sex offenders to rehabilitate them at an abuser specialized program, got up and explained to the entire congregation that abusers are usually not monstrous. They're usually funny. They're usually charming. They're sometimes handsome. They're usually people that are well-liked and respected in the community. She explained this from her professional experience and then sat down. Then another woman went to the microphone, and she took the microphone, and she had the most horrible experience of abuse. She talked about being abused by her father. She talked about being abused by her brother. And because of what happened to her, because of what she had experienced and seen, she couldn't possibly believe that Father Francis could ever have ever done what he had been accused of, that he could ever have sexually harassed this young boy. And tons of people who had personal experience with Father Francis walked up to the microphone and said, well, that isn't really abuse. That isn't what an abuser is. Tons of people made tons of excuses for him. So I want to affirm, Rora, I completely agree with you, especially, unfortunately, within the Catholic communities, that a lot of behavior that is accepted, that is brushed under the rug. You're talking about something I read in a study. It's called patriarchal terrorism. I think it's what it's called. It's when, like, there's a male abuser who is abusive towards a female partner on the basis of the belief that he is superior to the female partner because he's male. That's unfortunately something that can be common within religious communities. But the way that we handle it isn't by telling them, well, no, you're not really an abuser, or it's not so bad to be an abuser. The way that we do that is by going to our communities, going to our schools, and explaining to them that, no, this behavior is not acceptable. This behavior is despicable. This is what it means specifically to be an abuser. And if you do this, then that is what that means. We have to hold people accountable by very clearly defining what behavior is unacceptable and which is not acceptable. And we can't do that.
That we shouldn't tell people what they're doing is abusive. I think that's like taking it a little bit too far. I think we want to make people aware without being like, and you're fucking evil and irredeemable. Yeah. That's what I think we're trying to avoid.
Yep. Well, I think that you and I would simply fundamentally disagree. And I know that, like you, I think that if somebody does something beyond the pale, such as there are exceptions and shades of gray, I accept that. But I think that if there are some actions for which we as a community should never be forgiving of.
I think the human beings, I think it's completely possible, and I think it's a shame when people lack this skill, but it's completely possible, and it's easy to set boundaries without hating people. And it sounds to me like you're saying the only way to possibly set boundaries is to hate them.
I'm not saying that it's our business to understand why people do that. Like, as I'm not a psychiatrist, I am not a police officer. I don't work with that specific population.
You understand hate, though. Stop. You understand hate. You know what that is.
True. But what I'm saying is, it's not my business to understand the inner psyche of why you do the things that you do. All I know is that you are someone who is dangerous to my family and to the people that I love. That's all that I'm allowed to say. And for me personally, other people have different moral obligations. I feel that I have a moral obligation to despise and to hate somebody when they do something to my child. If for me to be
your child
or
to your child, yeah, sure.
You made earlier you made the opposite claim. You made the opposite claim earlier that it's your job, it's society's job to hate and despise them. Like, so no, I think it's not true. I think it's genuinely not society's job to hate and despise people. I think we should leave that to the people that are personally affected. I think that when you hate and despise people, it will make you do despicable things, and it's our job to protect even the abusers from the abuse of the victim.
But let's go back to society and what it is. Again, I know that this is nitpicking.
Everyone. I
Wait,
mean,
what is
I know.
society
Hey,
again?
stop,
What
stop,
does
stop,
it
stop,
mean to
stop.
hate?
Society, though?
Stop,
Everyone.
What
Stop.
does it mean to hate?
Hey, Fairy Queen,
All right.
stop. I want to get. I know this is heated, right? But I want to respect people's time. So we're going to keep going, but I want to give everyone who needs it an outro and then open it up because I know there are people in the community that wanted to come in and also join the discussion. So we're going to do that real quick. You can stay as long as you like. We're not ending the stream, but we are going to end the official closed portion because, again, 8 o'clock's coming up. I know I want to respect everyone's time, right? So that's what we're going to do. Brief closing thoughts. And then we'll get right back into it. I promise you. Start with Vigilante, and we'll just go around. Go ahead, Vigilante. Brief, concise as you can.
Yeah, so I'm going to address two of the things that I had to say. So on the emotional abuse aspect that Rora was addressing, so verbal aggression, dominating behavior, implementation of ideas of jealousy, slander, and forcing individuals to view disturbing negative images and behavior. That's some of the things that are described as emotional abuse. Pulling that up from a law website, just so you know. Now, just so you know, it is easier for a woman to address these things in the legal system than it is for a man. And to address what you said earlier, Wick, about like whether or not people can change. It is definitely, people can definitely change. I am somebody who's changed a lot. Probably don't know my backstory, but I was a member of the far right when I was a child. I've changed a lot. However, and I had a lot of very bigoted opinions. However, even if you do change, you still have to correct yourself and have the proclivity to have those opinions. And a lot of, while everybody has the potential to change, not everybody has the willpower to do so. So while
Gotcha.
these people might be
I
able
know
to
you want to
change,
go, but I got to keep this concise. We will.
Yep.
You know, we're not ending, so I just want to. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to snappy stuff so we can get into the meat of it. I'm sorry. We'll let you go once the opening starts. Right, Smith, go ahead, real quick, brief.
I think that you have to protect people and set boundaries for people. And I think that we're not good at setting boundaries when we're hateful. And I think that we're not going to be acting rationally when we're hateful. And I think that if you are personally affected, you have every right to feel that way and to be outraged and feel these negative emotions. And we should let you do it. And we should protect other people from you when you're doing that.
Okay.
You can follow me on YouTube, Real Smith. I'll help you learn every way that you're abusing your girlfriend.
Beautiful. Thank you. Go check them out. Rora Pickles, go ahead.
I think abuse is incredibly nuanced. I do agree there's extreme examples, but I just think that overall, there's a lot of people who are going to be more willing to accept that they are abusive in some regard. And I, like Smith said, think everyone to a degree is an abusive person. I think we all have the ability to do so. And I just think that the way we sort of approach it isn't productive. I think it's productive toward the extreme examples, but not towards the middle ground. And you can find me at twitch.tv/Rora or Aurora Pickles on Twitter and every other platform.
Beautiful. Thank you for being here. Always a pleasure. Pep, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Art by Pep on almost every platform that matters. I think that nuance is super important in all this, and I think that black and white thinking doesn't really help either victims or abusers. And I think that when we do this black and white thinking, it's easier to villainize them and give us this like great rage justice boner from like enacting kind of like social justice on them. But it's not the most actually effective thing to prevent or from happening again or prevent it from occurring in the first place. So I think we need to focus more on more pragmatic options that are actual solutions rather than what makes us feel like, we did like such a good job hating that person, basically.
Great rage justice boner. Awesome. That's the takeaway. Bang. Check her out. She's great. Thank you for being here. Joey, please.
Thanks.
I think it's important for us to open up the dialogue as that it's not just victimizing, or not victimizing, it's not just demonizing abusers, it is also silencing victims, eh, to kind of get a broader, I guess, spectrum of how many abusers are out there, how many people are suffering with these kind of thoughts or actions. Would be if we could create a safe space for victims to come out and say that they have been victimized, or they are unfortunately the product of a violent act. Domestic violence is usually accompanied by multiple things: psychological, sexual, wait, I already said psychological, verbal, and physical. It's not just it's a silent killer, and it's, as far as like what we're seeing as far as the silencing, it's a pandemic.
Thank you for being here. Where can people find you?
On Twitter, Joey Lotus, or Cosmic Lotus.
Okay, post that in my chat. Thanks. Go check her out, gang. She's been great. Last but certainly not least, star of the show, Fairy Queen.
Hey everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise to prove to you 3 things tonight. I promise to prove to you that the opposition would not be able to prove that our judicial systems, our school systems, the institutions that we rely on to report abuse, or our familial systems demonize abusers far too much. Think, number 1, consider judicial systems. Think about like what we talked about regarding our judicial systems. The only person who I can think even mentioned a relevant statistic was Vigilante, and Vigilante is on the same side of this issue as me towards the beginning. Now, the idea that it was the case that the fact of the matter is our term, the way that we prosecute is we don't prosecute enough people that offend. The sentences that we have are not good enough. The treatments that we have available for people within the judicial system are not sufficient, and oftentimes confuse the issue. Number 2, our institutions. I ask all of you the question I asked over and over again about school systems, public health education. I would like all of you, for those of you who feel that it is the case that in our institutions that we demonize abusers far too much, I have a bit of a homework assignment for you. Find me a source. I want you to find me something from an actual institution, from a school, from a public health institution, from a domestic violence campaign, which actually does demonstrate this, and send it to me. If you can send it to me, please do. And if you do, I will send you the list that is about this big, that shows all of the different institutions that do not do this. Again, I mentioned it at the very beginning. The World Health Organization does not do this. The CDC does not do this. The American Public Health Association doesn't do this. The Office of Against Human Violence from the United States DOJ does not do this. These, I'm not talking about small things. I mean institutions that have wide amounts of influence. Find me a wide influence like the CDC, a quote from the CDC that actually says that. Number 3, our family systems. We talked a little bit about like our personal lives. We talked a little bit about like what happens within our personal lives. Yourself what you should do if you find out that a friend is being abused, or if you find out that a family member is abusing a child in your family. Do you think that it will make your family safer to not demonize that person? And by that, I mean not cut off associations with that friend or with that family member after you find out that they've sexually abused a child in your family. And finally, I hope all of you have had a rousing discussion tonight. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I encourage all of you to hold abusers and hold people that domestically, sexually, and psychologically stalk or abuse other people. Hold people accountable. That is the only way. Years of professional experience and rehabilitation shows that the only way we can reduce recidivism rates is if we send these offenders to rehabilitation programs that actually work. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I want to open it up. Gang, I love you. Give me money. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, with that, if you have to go, I understand. Please feel free. But if you'd like to stay, I want to get into this more. We were having a rousing discussion. We have some people in the back that I want to bring in too. So if you want in on this discussion, is now open. Exclamation point Discord. Oh, go ahead.
As much as I disagree with you on the core point that I care about, I agree with you on everything fucking else. You're like, you're such a warrior fighting like all these people, Fairy Queen, like, and putting up with all of this at the same time.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Smith. And just for the record, I've really enjoyed talking with all of you tonight. And I think that all of us ultimately are on the same side of reducing abuse and protecting victims. I know that that's something that every single person in this room cares about. I did want to affirm everybody in that way as well.
It's and now that it's open, right? Not that I wasn't jumping in before, and I apologize for that, but I want to, right? Again, I understand, and I see your list of institutions, but if you think we treat felons in this country as anything else than second-class citizens, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, we look at sources, and we look at data, and we look at these things like that. The recidivism rate in our country is skyrocketed, right? Like, it's way above other judicial systems that have, that are also in the same kind of development stage that we are in, right? And so, like, what we are doing is not working. Right, what we are doing is not working, and I would challenge you that it isn't because we coddle, right? It's because that when someone is seen judiciously by the legal system as an abuser, they are depersoned by society. They are depersoned by their family, by their friends, by those workplaces. It's so hard to hold a job. If you find out that your coworker has a felony, that's a huge issue, is it not? Like, that's something that people don't feel safe anymore. They feel scared, and like I get what you're saying when you talked about CDC and all these other institutions, but I would argue that their overarching federalized nature is not as powerful as the individualized, more local institutions of family and in groups, right? I think that has a more impact.
I spat. I forgot to mention, but I spat on a cop once. I remember in college. I remember this is a memory that sticks in my mind. In college, this was like I was 20 years old, and I was in my hating cops phase. And a cop car passed, and the cop like sped past, and I was on the crosswalk, and I was like, "Fuck you, this cop every time I walk on this crosswalk, he speeds past me." So I spat on his cop car. And I remember I saw it splatter on the windshield, and I was proud of myself. And I'm so glad that I was not like he could have like literally put me in prison for that. And I'm glad that he didn't. And I'm glad that I'm not like demonized for that.
So 2 questions. So one thing, whenever Fairy Queen was talking about how pedophiles still have a proclivity to be pedophiles after the rehabilitation, Smith was pointing out like how they might not reoffend. Smith, do you think it's okay for people to be attracted to children?
Yes.
Seriously?
It's not good for them. It's not good for society. What do I think they should be killed or put in prison? No. I think if you rape people, you should be put in prison. If you hurt kids, you should be put in prison. You need to be separated from society. We need to not allow harm to be done to kids. And I think that a lot more people are actually pedophiles than will even admit it. And we're not going to actually solve anything by demonizing these people. They should actually be talking about it, and they should go to the fucking therapists.
Does anyone want to touch that, or do we want to move on?
I ain't touching that.
Yep. I ain't touching it.
Does anybody else want a virtue signal?
I don't feel like it.
I've already given my response earlier about what rehabilitation for offenders looks like and what it doesn't look like. So you said therapy. I've already stated traditional psychotherapy, traditional addiction counseling doesn't work for when we're talking about offenders. All of the therapies that have been proven to work, that have the most empirical data behind them that reduce recidivism, require the person to take personal responsibility. And those sessions do not look like typical therapy sessions. It is not sitting on the couch and talking about your feelings and validating how you feel. That's not what the therapy looks like. And in fact, I can link, somebody can find it for me since I'm lazy, and actually I'm not going to link. Find the Times article that talks about sex offender rehabilitation. It'll give you a description in that story what that session actually looks like. So,
my second question was actually for Wick. Wick, do you think there's any possible way, whether we stop, even if we stop demonizing people for being sex offenders, for people to actually feel safe around people that have like raped somebody?
No, I think that someone who has lost all fear has lost a friend. I think it's right and okay to be protective and things like that. But just because I fear someone doesn't justify all actions. Otherwise, we could justify what happened to the individual who was killed in the subway. People were afraid, right? They were afraid, and they made a legitimate reason to fear. But we do not justify any single action just because you are afraid. So it's much more nuanced than this. I don't think it's okay, right? Just because you feel a certain way to act on those feelings. Feelings are valid, but actions based on feelings are not always valid and not always okay. Just because I feel like lust towards a woman doesn't mean I should be able to act on that lust, right? Like you can't, we got to decouple these things. And in much in the way that I want to decouple holding someone accountable from dehumanization. I think that we have coupled these things. We have treated them as the same. We have treated them, even in this conversation, as synonyms. And I think that has done harm both to us, to the discourse, and also to the victims themselves, as Joey pointed out, because they are unable to see what is happening because they think my boyfriend, spouse, girlfriend, whatever, can't be a monster. I would never love a monster. And so what they're doing to me cannot be abusive. So we have to decouple these things in order for people to come out and admit and be able to see, both as a victim and as the abuser, that what they are doing is wrong.
Entirely fair.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Any other?
You shut us all up there, didn't you?
So $5 for fondue to say, my son, I'm not touching that with a 60-foot pole / Jesus. Okay. Thank you for the Jesus.
One thing I wanted to bring up
Oh, please.
was what Fairy Queen said about it's like your responsibility to protect your child by demonizing somebody if you need to. But I feel like there's a huge that spans a lot of actions. The potential for actions there, it's pretty huge. The things you could do the steps you could take to protect a child without like actively demonizing everybody who's engaged in a particular kind of abuse or any tangential kind of abuse that you've said is like you just can't fathom anybody changing, et cetera, et cetera. I think that it's possible to be protective and to acknowledge harm been done without being like, all these people are worthless now, like da 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 da.
I'm sorry. I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree.
Really?
If I think that we are.
Okay.
Interesting.
I don't
Alright.
want to take
Yeah,
too much
fair.
time. I think bees in the trap has been popping in and out. I don't want to take I don't know if the bees in the trap is a woman or a man, but I'm assuming a woman
Fairy
because
Queen, I promise you, I can get him in there. You can take the time to respond you need, because I'm curious too. So don't feel like you have to hold back. I want to know the answer to that question. You said agree to disagree, but can you elaborate on why a little bit?
because I'm not, again, I keep going back. We need clarification specifically for the terms that we are talking about. When you say demonize, what concrete thing do you mean should happen?
Well, I
That's
guess
what
I could
I'm
ask the
saying.
same thing of you because when you were using it as well, and it sounded like for you that meant like anything and everything that you could
So
possibly
it
like.
depends on it. Okay, it depends on the context that we're talking about, right? So if we're talking,
Yeah.
for instance, in the school building, right? So I'm a teacher. So if I suspect the child in my classroom is being sexually abused, that means demonizing the abuser means a few things. First of all, it means that the man that is abusing that child is not allowed to have any contact with her while she is on campus. It
Man or
means
woman?
man
That
or
doesn't seem
woman.
like
Okay.
to me
sounds
that's
like
not
boundaries.
demonizing.
That
That's just
sounds
like that's just like a pragmatic course of action.
Well, that's an example of one thing that you could do. Another example of something you could do is reporting it to the police, regardless of what she or he wants. Regardless of what your student wants, you pick up the phone and you call the police and you file a police report and you explain to the police what happened. You call CPS and you explain to that person. You tell your supervisor, you file an incident report, right? These are things that you can do, right? And the reason I say that that is demonizing in that case is the minute that you pick up the phone and you call CPS, and anyone that works with children or works with vulnerable populations knows this, is the minute you are inviting the state to go into that child and that family's life. That can have, if you're wrong that child abuse is not occurring within that family's home, that decision to pick up the phone and to call could have catastrophic effects. It could have the effect of inviting more state
necessarily
influence.
demonizing though. I feel like this is more of a semantics issue because all the things that you're saying, those just sound like the pragmatic, appropriate steps that should be taken during that. And now you're saying that because there's the potential that there wasn't actual abuse, that's what makes it demonizing. That doesn't make sense to me.
I think that it's useless to use words. So a frustration that I have is like talking about words like demonizing, like hate, like society without a thing behind the word to talk about, right? So when I say demonizing, what I mean is I am reporting it and I am telling the community that one of the students in my classroom isn't safe and that somebody in the community is
I think everybody has a very different
safe.
definition of what demonizing is.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it
And-
That's not my
personally.
definition.
Yeah,
And-
that's not my definition.
Those are just like rational, pragmatic actions that you
Those-
should
yeah,
take.
that's
Like I think you should leave
responsibility
just take
even.
half of those. Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
my
but-
question. I can maybe help. I can maybe help clear this up with a question very quick. Someone,
Okay.
you find out that someone in your classroom, right?
Mhm.
Their parents did that 20 years ago. Well, that doesn't make sense. But okay, so you're talking with someone, and someone has already been through the systems. They've already been
Mhm.
reported. They've already gone through the system. They've already had justice. They've already been held accountable. After that is done, do you still exclude them, demonize them, ostracize them, etc.?
May I actually answer this? I've been wanting to answer this for a while, not to intercede or be a relief pitcher.
Go on.
But yes, just because one has served their time, we have no idea whether or not they have made a good utilization of that time. The best way to determine whether or not you should be associated with someone who has a prior history of violence is what have they learned? What actions have they taken to either take responsibility for what they have done, to learn from it, and whether or not they appreciate the gravity of their errors and what active measures they're going to take to prevent them from being involved in things like that. One example of this that I would say is not a good example is someone like Mr. Girl. Mr. Girl in his I used to beat my wife video said, yeah, I know that I'm now not ever going to beat Shaylin because I've yelled at her like crazy, but I've never hit her. That is just a dry drunk. Just because you don't engage in being, sorry, my apologies, not to, but it is a dry drunk. When everyone makes that sort of an accusation or that statement, but doesn't indicate, yes, I understand that my desire to abuse comes from a feeling of a lack of control, a feeling that I cannot control things, and a desire to control the world and others around me, which is what studies demonstrate abuse really stems from. It's an inability to feel in control. If you don't have any grounding techniques, if you have no demonstrable efforts that improve your characteristic, then yeah, you are more than welcome. And again, we can talk about what happens whenever people get out into the society and the world once again. That doesn't mean I need to do business with you ever.
Okay, so some people need to feel control, so they hit people. Okay, so in your world, nobody that anybody will ever admit it. So okay, that's a shitty fucking world. I'm gonna say that's
Wait,
an
what?
awful solution. Fuck that.
Okay, so you clearly either didn't hear me, or maybe you should get your hearing checked the next time that you were
I
at a
heard you
doctor's.
fucking clear, loud and
though.
clear. I
You
heard
didn't
you.
though.
Hey, Wick.
You
Let me
didn't
clean
though.
up my ears and you can say it again.
Okay, so again, the thing, I don't know if this is your goal to be this antagonistic, but I really already find you very just like,
Well,
and I
you
don't
can
like
start
input.
it. So
I have a question and I have a response. So
Okay,
Wick, I want to
after that, you can do both of those, and then I want to toss it to Pancakes and give Pancakes.
Jesus fucking Christ, you unbalanced weirdo.
What? I'm just moderating.
I'm speaking to Smack,
Oh,
I
okay.
apologize, not you.
I was like,
no, I'm
I'm
the
just trying to
antagonistic
decide
one.
who goes next. That's all. Please don't hurt me.
Yeah, but you're really bad at it, and you don't even do it in a way that's jaunty or fun.
I think that you're an abusive
You're
person.
Okay,
dehumanizing.
what are you
you
going to do
never-
about it, Smack? Because you were the one who said that you should be
Ooh.
associating with me.
No,
are you
I
gonna
think
do
that you
about it
should.
then, if
I think
I
you should
am?
be able. What are you going to do about it? Is something I think you should go to therapy.
But now you can't make me, and now you're on a panel with
can't.
me. So what are you going to
can't.
do about it?
What? I'm going to
This
say
is
that I
your
think you're
system in
abusive.
practice, is it not?
This is
No.
not productive. Can we stop this, please?
I'm going to say that
Really?
I think your behavior is abusive, and
Okay.
you can do with it whatever you want.
Okay.
Okie dokie,
Okay.
artichoke.
Okay.
I
Go ahead, Fairy
I
Queen,
have
please.
Yep, so I have a response to you, Wick. So as I've mentioned before in a previous panel, I'm a literature nerd. Specifically, one of the things that I really love to do in college is creative writing. It was the concentration that I completed my master's degree in. And one of the things that you do in a nonfiction workshop, a creative nonfiction workshop, is you write a personal essay. So that's a personal memoir about something that happened to you in your life. So some of the workshops that I participated in where people wrote about their personal memoirs, and these were adults, so they were not talking about abuse that was happening to them right then. They were talking about abuse that happened to them way in their childhoods, things that happened to them a long, long time ago. And now they're college freshmen or sophomores, and they're in the classroom sharing their memoirs about their experiences. Sometimes we no, we didn't, but I'm just going to use that hypothetical scenario, creative writing workshop for a creative nonfiction. So suppose I am the instructor, right? And I get an essay, a personal memoir about somebody who was personally abused. But the point of the personal memoir is to try to convince me that the person, that the parent that abused them, that the grandfather, the family member that beat them up was really a good person, was really a nice guy, was really not a monster, was
You're
really
talking
not
about Small Fry by Lisa Wagner Fry, the daughter of
well-
Steve Jobs. Like that's
well,
literally what happened with her
Thank you for the gift
biography.
sub.
Well, thank you, Bees in the chat. But what I'm saying is, when I get that, and I am supposed to write a response to that, I'm not going to take legal action. I'm not going to pick up the phone and I'm not going to call CPS. But when I write my letter to that student in response to them, I have a choice. I can agree with that person and say, listen, I agree with you. I don't think that this is a monstrous, like you're free to think whatever it is you want. Or I can make the second choice where I say, listen, I understand that this happened to you. I understand that this is tremendously painful and that and how you decide to respond to it, you can respond to it however it is you wish to respond to it. How you seek spiritual healing is your own business. But as your teacher, I am telling you that what I am reading in your story is abusive. And when we come back together for workshop and I explain that to my other students who are also people in my care, I also would say that out loud, because when we're sharing a story like that in a wider community, what I say as the instructor in that position, it doesn't just have an impact on that one individual student's story who I'm reading. It has an impact on every single person in that room who's listening to it. And Smith, I have a question for you, because you've mentioned this a couple of times.
I just want to say I agree with what you said.
Yeah, well,
I think you should do that.
The second thing I would say, I would challenge you, Smith, and in the friendliest way. You've said a couple of times that if people, what was it specifically that you said that you're worried that abusers would be less willing to come forward, that if more demonization was put forward, and the reason why it's important that more abusers don't come forward, I have two questions for you. One, is your concern that we won't catch more abusers, so we won't find more child molesters or more batterers? So that's the reason why you're afraid they won't come forward or they won't admit. And secondly, my second question is, so I'm think about specific states that have really harsh penalty laws. So, and I'm referring to the judicial system because it's an easy way to look at it. So states that arguably demonize abuse more so than others. They have higher sentencing laws. There was Bill SB 1342 that recently passed in Florida in October 2022 with Ron DeSantis, the one that stated that a child that was raped that a rapist somebody who raped a child under the age of 12 is now eligible for the death penalty if they have one aggravating factor from a list. My question to you is there empirical data that proves that in these states that are harder on crime, harder specifically on abuse crime, so not drug crime, we're not talking about petty theft, we're not talking about alcoholism, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about
I don't have an answer
specifically. Do you have proof that it actually is lower? Is there any evidence to show that it is lower? Is my question to you.
No, but that also stems off of your first question, which I don't have any evidence of anything, but what your first question was, can you rephrase the first question? I'm sorry. I'm getting a little bit
concise, please. I want to.
I'm a little bit mentally tired
because Pancake's just been waiting a little bit.
I'm sorry. Why don't we skip over me because I have to admit I'm tired too. So
Okay.
somebody else.
No,
can
the
find
first,
the-
the first question was along the lines of, do I think that will it reduce? Will it make more people? I want more people to talk about their own acts of abuse, and I want them to admit that. And do I think that that will cause us to catch more abusers? All right. So, I think that the main thing, that most important thing that I think will be the result of people being willing to talk about the ways that they're abusive is that they're going to catch their abusive behaviors before it actually becomes a problem that is something they have to go to jail for. So when they're going to be like, okay, like the way that I'm like, the way that I argue with my girlfriend about dinner is abusive and I need to stop. And like, if you just don't admit that and you say, no, I'm not abusive, you're not willing to see that bad thing about yourself and try to change that, then it's going to get worse and worse, and you're just going to become worse till the point where you actually
It
like
snowballs.
should go to jail.
I want to get Pancakes in on here because Pancakes is joined us. So Pancakes, go ahead. Floor is
Yeah,
yours.
I wanted to kind of branch off and ask the opposition for demonization, which I'm aware Fairy Queen and Vigilante. Is there like another one, by the way? Or am I missing someone?
Perhaps kind of in the middle, but no, you got it.
Okay. All right, so I wanted to give a hypothetical of on the pedo question, a less extreme example, just so I can get your viewpoint on this. Let's say they haven't committed that, they haven't crossed the threshold, right? The kind of like be all end all of like, I've committed the action, right? Which usually leads to the demonization. Let's say they admit it, but they're not like proud of it. Their demeanor isn't proud of it. They decide to be ashamed of it, and through observation and seeing their actions, they continue not to actually molest/rape children. Does this person deserve to be societally cast away, or should they be like a project that's like worked on and helped?
So I personally think they should go to therapy. I mean, part of the reason as to why I believe in like the death penalty for pedophiles and stuff is so people like that are scared and want to go to therapy so they don't offend. But I generally think that people who are pedophiles should be encouraged to go to therapy and seek help. That's pretty much a short answer to your
Do you
question.
think the death penalty? I'm
The
curious.
death penalty is not going to make them want to go to therapy.
I just look. Saying
And would
if
that
you're
be
a
on repeat
pedophile,
offenders?
if you're a PDF file, right? We've been saying it all night. Okay,
We're
if
talking about the
if you're
social
a
consequence.
pedophile, right? My monetization for this video on YouTube is already gone. Okay, so if you're a pedophile, right, and you get the wall basically, right? Like, I don't see how more people would be like, oh, maybe I should go to like admit to this, right? I just don't.
There's no
I don't
incentive
see
to
that.
do that,
Yeah,
like
well, I
in
mean,
any
if
way.
you-
There's only
for $5 before I let you respond, Vigilante. I want Vigilante to respond. But $5 to say, I think it is more likely what will happen is both victim and abuser will say, yes, it's abusive, and that's okay. Thank you for the $5. Continue giving me money, gang. Come on, donations. Vigilante, respond, please.
So I'm saying like death penalty for people who have offended, not for people who are just generally pedophiles. People who are just generally pedophiles who have not offended should be encouraged to seek therapy. If you have not offended yet, you are a pedophile, and you're watching this, go to fucking therapy.
What do you think deters people though? Like let's say they haven't offended, like they haven't committed the crime. What do you think in the first place prevents people from ever coming up and kind of like making it known? Not like not in this braggadocious. They're not, or what would be the word? Or they're just basically bragging, and they're kind of like they're showboating the fact that they're like virtue signaling, right? If they're not doing that version of what we've seen online previously, they're still going to get the backlash regardless.
I want to give it to 𝕵𝖎, B. B.
B's great.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. You're fine. That's
Because I know
really fine.
you're more sympathetic to the, at least as I've read your statements so far, you're more sympathetic to Fairy Queen's side. Is that fair characterization?
That's a great question. So part of me thinks that we should never have a death penalty because I want to use them and get every drip and drop of use out of them possible, like by conducting experiments with them and seeing what will or will not change and stop pedophilia and what will or will. I'm not saying that's ethical. I'm saying this is deeply unethical and problematic, but I don't want to waste that
Holy
human
shit.
being when I could use them for different things. But that's
Nobody
neither
can
here
say
nor
that
there.
I'm a bad judge of
This is
character.
obviously, I'm not going to respond to you. I just don't really want to talk to you, Smith. So
I know.
when you're talking about young kids who come forward or young adults who do come forward, the problem or the reason that we don't encourage that is because of the immediate reaction and desire to send them to a troubled teens camp, which that's not going to help. Send them to a juvenile detention center or proactively try to put them away either in a juvenile detention center or otherwise. To me, my hypothesis is that there are two groups of pedophiles, and one is deserving of space and maybe some sort of help, like whether, I don't know if it's electroshock therapy, if it's whatever it is that will help them be able to readjust those lines. If it's crossed wires, great, absolutely. But there's pedophiles like Larry Nassar, where they're indiscriminate and indeterminate with their victims. And it's all about the fact that they are in a position of power and are able to manipulate and better manipulate those individuals. Then there are individuals who truly have a sexual desire for, and it usually sticks to one age range and one sex. So it doesn't deviate. It's not a power play. It may be tied to childhood. It may not be. I don't know. But wherein, for whatever reason, the wires got crossed, and that is what their body sexually responds to. If it's that second group, because the first group, like Larry Nassar, put them out in airlock immediately. We don't need any other Larry Nassars. They're trash. But the second group may have or may be more deserving of rehabilitation, because I'm cis, hetero, straight, whatever. If you told me, oh my God, B, I have to report you and put you into a camp because you like God, like you cannot like guys. You cannot. I think, well, wait, what? What are you talking? Like, that's just like my crush or my preference or whatever else. They may not understand. And if there is a way that could even be fixed, I don't know. I'm certainly no medical professional. But that second group that does come forward, there should be a soft place for them to land, and either a psychiatric program or facility or institution in which people who are far more educated than I can determine helpful things.
Yeah, I want just to help the discussion, right? Because we're hitting all sorts of points all around. I want to maybe ask the panel, right? And some of the quieter members of the panel, perhaps, right? Rora, Joey, maybe Pep here. What would you like? What do you think of that when you hear like someone is okay with doing experiments on someone who's done something they considered bad, right? Like horrific, to be clear, right? I don't want to minimize it, right? Someone who's done something horrific, right? What do we think of that? What's your thoughts?
I didn't hear Queen's response earlier, by the way, to my hypothetical. I'm kind of like wondering what her perspective is.
Okay,
if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine too. But you guys be thinking of that, right? Well, I'll pass it to Queen, concisely, hopefully, and then we can get to the others. Queen.
Pancakes. My response. So I'm so sorry. I am getting tired. So your example was a pedophile who is not offended, correct? And they feel ashamed of it and they want to find rehabilitation. Is that right?
I'm giving you like the most humanizing like hypothetical I could possibly give you.
So the answer is, I think that they do need to go to therapy, but they need to go to like a specialized program. So as I stated before, like the kind of program that you need to go to, like you would need to, in the state of South and North Carolina, for somebody like that, you would have to get something that's called an individualized treatment program. So you could also follow perhaps the 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜 model since you haven't offended yet. But again, as I've stated before, I think the best that person can probably hope for is to learn how to cope with it and how to control themselves.
Like a lot of mental disorders, right?
But as I stated before, when we're talking about like paraphilias, so specifically, so pedophilia is an example of that, bestiality is an example of that. Most of the research is pretty grim.
Autism, ADHD, every mental disorder you learn to cope with.
Well,
Yeah.
There's a difference between different mental disorders, right? And a paraphilia is not the same thing as ADHD or autism.
Bipolar can lead
Just
to
'cause
like
you-
direct harm, as an example.
Just because you have a paraphilia doesn't mean you're gonna go out and rape people to fulfill your paraphilia. Like, just men have a paraphilia. Like, it's not a paraphilia because it's fucking adaptive. But men have unhealthy obsession and sexual fixation of women far beyond what we should. Like, it's we're like rape beasts, and we don't go out raping people because so if men can do it, so can't pedophilic men not go out and rape people.
The problem is how intrinsic
real quick.
sexuality is to humanity.
Yeah,
and to
$5.
being a human.
I'll let you go, but $5 from Micronomics to say, is anyone concerned due to secularization? If you demonize someone, there will be a lack of priests to exorcise them. Thank you for the $5. Go ahead, B.
We can talk about canon law if you'd like. I did take that during law school, and it is quite fascinating.
That was obviously a joke donation. We don't need to engage with it, but go on.
But anyways, I'm done with my hypothetical.
I'm just kidding. I think the issue with your hypothetical is that sexuality and a disorder associated with it I think it's the same thing with sex addiction in a very layman terms way. It's so intrinsic to being a healthy human is sexuality and engaging in sexuality, like masturbatory efforts or with another partner. There could be treatment, but what kind of a treatment would?
Well, the difference between let's say when we're talking about sexuality, right? The main difference between what we consider normal sexuality and pedophilic sexuality, right? Is that pedophilic sexuality is inherently abusive and harmful majority, if not 100% of the time.
We are getting stuck on pedophiles, and this isn't the full, like, we are acting. So here's my problem with this. The level of abuse and the types of abuse are so broad that in pedophiles such a small portion of that whole spectrum. We are getting caught on this. We are getting stuck on this to the detriment, I think, of the conversation as a whole.
I agree, and I don't have much to add to it.
we can move on to a different.
Yeah,
thing,
I'm
sure.
sorry. I don't mean to cut off the back and forth, but I want to move on to different types of abuse. We talked a lot about the legalized abuse, right? Or not legalized, but the legal standard of abuse. And now that we're in the open, I want to talk a little bit about the less legal standard. I want to talk about that which does not quite make it there, but is close, right? And I understand that it's a blurry line. Emotional is a good one. As Fairy Queen said, what is emotional abuse? What does that look like? There is a definition legally for it, but what is it? I don't know, and most people I wager also do not know. And so let's talk about it less from a legal perspective and more from a societal perspective.
I think if you look into any narcissistic, sociopathic, basically a lot of the antisocial disorders, if you extract any context that you can think of or know of, there's much more obvious and easier ways to extrapolate. Like, what is let's say if I'm being verbally abusive, you could probably extract really easily from the dynamics that they have their relationships with both family and partners very easily.
Abuse in a less legalized sense, would that be the imposition of one's will on another without that person's explicit consent?
Wait, can you ask that again?
Oh, are you asking for a broader definition, Wick?
I don't want a definition. I'm saying whatever definition you think of as emotional abuse, when does it draw the line that someone who is a stranger should step in? I guess I should be more clear. That's my bad. So I see someone, right? I am visiting a friend's home, and they and their significant other are in a shouting match, right? They've come and they started screaming at each other. They're both being what I consider to be emotionally abusive to each other. Do I have a responsibility to step in, and what does that look like?
I think
Yes,
you do when it
but
becomes a
doing it-
pattern.
Yeah,
I've
is it a
been
one-off?
several. Okay, so I come over. I've been friends with these people for a year, and every time I come
Okay.
to their house, one or the other starts screaming at each other. Right, it becomes a constant thing. What do I do socially?
I've done this.
You
I've done
approach
this
it privately. I wouldn't do it in the moment because you can really make that situation a lot more difficult. But you wait until people are calm and level-headed, and you approach it amicably and logically. Because there's a lot of situations in my past where if somebody would have stepped in the moment, I would have been very badly hurt. So
Yeah.
you have to kind
Yeah.
of also wait out situations patiently and approach it when people are level-headed. Because if you approach it when someone's heated, they're probably not going to listen to you anyways. Like, truthfully.
There's a big benefit that comes with that it does come with being a woman and or a blonde, because when I have had either cousins or friends becoming, I say this just because it's really easy, at least for me, to come in and act like I didn't notice that there was fighting and kind of remind them that other people are there by just appearing and talking to them or loudly making noises in the same room that they're trying to have their hushed toxic fight in as well. I think that there is a way with which to like call attention to it without calling attention to it. The biggest thing that I never want to do is isolate either person in a way that would how am I going to say this?
So other than leaving in the moment, right? Other than leaving in the moment, because I think the consensus, at least from all of you, seems to be don't step in the moment because it might make things worse.
I've stepped in the moment. I'm trying to wrap my mind around, because I believe you.
What about leading
That-
people on?
That might be
I
bad,
feel like
Aurora. I
in the
just can't
moment is a
imagine
time
it being
to, like,
bad.
diffuse, but not necessarily correct.
Can you repeat that, Pep? We didn't hear the first
I
part.
think chiming in the moment or trying to break things up in the moment is, but not necessarily correct the abuse.
You keep cutting in.
Yeah,
and
you're
out,
cutting in and
so-
out.
Fucking hell! Why doesn't
Get
my mic
close,
do this,
closer to
man?
just closer to you. Just get closer to your mic.
I think that it's important to step in to defuse.
You might want to
But,
turn off sound
See there?
suppression.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
no.
about to do that right now. I'm literally doing.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Try again.
Yeah.
One more time.
So I think when people are fighting,
Oh.
fuse.
Okay.
Still doing it.
Yeah, it's still doing
Hey,
it.
what the fuck? Oh my god.
So
I'm
I
sorry
think
about that.
let me try to translate. You can just nod your head if this is correct. I think that it's a this is your words. When people step in to try to diffuse the situation, that is with good intentions, but it's probably not going to work in the moment. Is that kind of what? No.
No.
Okay, I'm getting this. Go ahead. Well, hopefully she can fix
Is it if it's a couple being mutually abusive or mutually toxic? Would mutually toxic be the appropriate term you're talking about?
Yes, when people are in there and they are both like, well, I don't like, you can't satisfy me sexually, and oh well, I don't care. Maybe if you exercise like your sister, I would be more attracted to you. Just crazy stuff, just yelling and screaming at each other, right?
Well,
Like,
that sounds like I don't want to say a fair match, but if they're both coming with the same level of vitriol towards one another,
you don't think that's abusive?
I think mutual abuse is far different from one versus the other. Does that make sense? In which you are, I don't know.
It happens
It's almost
commonly
always
in relation.
mutual.
Okay.
Yeah, in relationship.
Mutual abuse is incredibly common. It's about it's almost 50% of abusive relationships, and it can either be symmetrical abuse or asymmetrical abuse, where both people are abusing each other equally, or one person is the main abuser and one person is sort of reciprocating that abuse back as a survival mechanism or a defense mechanism.
So even if they're both yelling at each other equally, like with the same level of energy or the same level of like upset or whatever else, there's still a chance one or the other may be in danger if we allow that to continue.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, because there could be one person, for example, like someone could be gaslit forever and
Okay.
pushed emotionally to the point of snapping. And what you're seeing is a remarkable situation where that person is losing their fucking mind, but in reality, they're begging and pleading and trying to communicate with that partner 9 times out of 10, right? And they're pushed to that point. So that base assumption that they're both equally responsible based on what you're seeing, I just, that's why I think like we see abuse as a surface level thing and we emotionally react. It makes us feel a thing. And that's not necessarily wrong. I feel it's fairly justified to emotionally react. But we need to place sort of a logical spin on this and understand that it's probably a lot more complicated. So,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
so what I'm saying too
Absolutely.
is if we sort of like look at it as, oh, they're both screaming at each other or one person's screaming. What if, for example, whereas my situation where I was emotionally abused for years and purposely driven to snap so that it could be weaponized against me and I could be the bad person, right? So again,
Okay.
it's so much more deep than that. That's what I'm saying.
I wanna give
Could I
space to-
walk you through this situation that I did? This was like years ago.
Sure.
Like so like I just noticed this happening with 2 of my friends. I think they're married now. I haven't been talking to them, but and I think that I had a good impact on their. This was pretty early on in their relationship, but they would have these like fights and they'd start going into it in front of me and stuff, and I would be like, guys, like you're both like not like you're both like freaking like you are right about this and you're right about this and nothing's gonna change. Like you're in an impasse and
Did it
nothing's
help?
gonna change that. Yes.
I wanna
It was
give-
embarrassing.
Yeah.
It was embarrassing. It made me. I let myself look like the asshole. I was like, look, I know I'm a fucking asshole for doing this.
But it
And-
sounded
and-
like
and
you
so-
validated both their feelings. And usually in situations
Yes.
like that, why people are at an impasse is because they don't feel validated, right? Or heard.
That's what I
So-
was trying to do. I was trying to validate both because they both were right about part of it, usually. So
That's typically how it is. Both people are usually right to some degree about their feelings or what they're
I
feeling.
want to give
So
space.
yeah.
Yeah, I want to give space to Joey first, and then I want to go to Fairy Queen. So Joey, I know you've been quiet a little bit. I want to give you some space to speak here. Go ahead.
I'm kind of taking this all in, but I think it's important to kind of in that kind of scenario to go about it delicately. I kind of what's her name? I'm so sorry. Rora. I kind of side with Rora. One, you do not know like what you're kind of impeding on, but I do think that if you care about these people, actually no, you should say something. There's a quote, in the end, what will hurt us the most is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Being a domestic violence survivor myself, when one of the 2 things, the hardest things I had to hear was, why did you stay? And the other one was like, I noticed some things, but I didn't say anything. Right. So like, if you do see something, if you do see a pattern, if you see someone fighting, if you see anything that kind of, one, trust your gut. If your gut's telling you like, okay, this doesn't seem right, pull someone off to the side, or kind of go about it delicately. And yeah, you could even, you could save life. And again, yeah, the 2 things, yeah. When I was told that 2 people saw what he was doing to me, it killed me. Like, you could have said something. If and also if somebody would have acknowledged that they saw it outside of myself, I think there's a good chance, I'm not sure, but that I could have left sooner and it wouldn't have ended up the situation.
Is there ever a way in which a brother? Okay, so abuse can be
real quick,
done.
Fondue for $5 more. Sorry, money. $5 from Fondue to say, I think we are conflating the stigma of abuse with the stigma of invading others' privacy. Okay, carry on, B.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely believe that men and women can both be the abusers, but in a case in which, like with you, if your partner was male, is there anything that could have been said that would have either is the abuser aware that they are being abusive in that time? Is that the first part of my question?
I think
almost
sometimes
never.
they can be. Sometimes they
Okay.
can be, but almost never,
Okay.
like he said.
Yeah.
Almost never.
it's usually a delusion of some sort.
Mhm.
Okay, because I understand it comes from a desire to control, but some are conscious of the manipulation and some aren't. So if one of their friends or a person they respected said, "You're being really manipulative right now, and I don't think that they did anything wrong, especially to deserve that much anger," could that have snapped them out of it or maybe made them reconsider? Is there something that could have been said positively that would not result in you getting the brunt of someone telling them they're being abusive?
I think that comes
Again,
down
I
to the
think you
question
need
of
to trust
respect,
your
isn't it?
yeah. You need to trust
I'm
your
sorry to
gut
interrupt.
too. Again, you got to go about this very delicately, especially if you kind of fear danger, or there could be something outside of this fight. You could again either pull this person off to the side. You can tell them a couple or 2 days later, like, "Hey, I really didn't like the way you were talking to your spouse. Is there anything wrong? Can I help you?" Like, instead of it being like, "I'm accusing you," like,
Okay.
"How can I help you?"
I wanna
It's a lot of the
just
rhetoric, at least. Like, so,
finish,
for
but then I want to toss it to a couple others. But finish your thought, 𝕵𝖎, and then I want to toss it to a couple others. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a sexual assault survivor advocate, so that's what I do for volunteer work. One of the things that we were taught with domestic violence or in cases of like spousal assault or other things is that a direct confrontation with the abuser almost always endangers the abuse victim far more. So, which it's probably like don't swim at night or something else like that if you don't want to get bitten by a shark. So I'm wondering if that is still accurate or if that's outdated advice that should maybe be updated by at least so be more informed by former domestic violence survivors or other things.
I was only talking about mutual abuse. I don't know, like that sounds actually sounds dangerous to do in the case of like one person being like, yeah.
My
I wanna-
personal
What do you
experience is a bad
think?
call.
What do you think, Joey? What do you think? Like, because you were saying that
I
might have
think if
helped
it's
you.
well, I'm saying it might have helped me at the point of where one, with mine, it's not the same across the board, but with mine, if anybody could kind of catch wind of what he was doing, it kind of it did kind of it would stop him in the moment. Usually that would kind of be brought back up later, and it would get pretty bad. But what I'm meaning is more like, I guess I took it out of context. Like if you're witnessing this kind of fight, and let's say you're more of a friend to the guy, if you're more of a friend to the girl, if you're a friend to both of them, like I would approach at least one of them and kind of, I guess, like I said, approach it in a very delicate way. Like, how can I help you? Like, what's going on? Is there something else going on? Just take it away from the relationship, take it away from the fight. Because yeah, if you say, I don't like the way you were treating her, like, how dare you or something, if you start criticizing their person, it can be it can be life altering.
If I had a friend
for
approach an ex or anyone for abusing me, I've been physically abused, emotionally, all that. It would have been, did you tell them to talk to me? What have you been telling them behind the scenes? I had an ex try to K-word me for opening up about abuse. And often these situations take time to get out of. For example, it's a lot more delicate, and typically you don't, you want to offer resources and help without putting that person in a dangerous situation. And even if it's just an emotionally abusive situation, it can be very dangerous for that person. And if they're being financially controlled, anything like that. So, you got to approach these situations very delicately. And in the situation Smith brought up, that seems just like that might have been an appropriate time to actually like say, hey, you guys, this isn't healthy. But there's a lot of instances where it may not be safe for the person.
Okay, I wanna before just real quick, I wanna get because Aaron's with us and he hasn't had space to speak, and I want to get Fairy Queen because Fairy Queen's been trying to speak for a little bit, and I want to check if Pep's audio works now. But let's toss it to Fairy Queen, then Aaron, then Pep. That's the order we're gonna go in. Fairy Queen, you're up.
Can I go next after that?
Yes, you can use.
I'm actually going to skip over because I think Joey basically has my position. If you see somebody like abuse happening, I think that you should call the police. And most of us probably will not see a couple outright arguing out in the middle of the street, but you probably will hear something through your bedroom door, right? Or through like your neighboring wall, right? If you see something, I think you have the responsibility to report it. And I think that Joey said it far more beautifully than I could. So I'll pass on the baton to the next person.
So, Aaron, go ahead. What do you think?
Thank you. That's a hard person to follow up next to. So, I have a commentary, and then I have a question for Smith in amongst this that I think leads us into another portion of the conversation, which is my commentary and experience is addressing your abuse or your abuser directly to their face can be real dangerous if you're in the midst of it. I've also been there watching somebody get abused as a bystander in charge of a large audience, and you have an obligation. That's also dangerous because if you're the first person on scene and you're the only person with the authority, you can end up taking a blow, which I have, by a dude who didn't think that I should have said anything in a foreign country, no less. By the way, but no matter where you are, we have an obligation. You see something, you should say something. I mean, it sounds really corny, but I believe so. But it is dangerous, so that obligation should be handled with care and discretion. Which I think is what the ladies were saying before me, is that there's a time and a place. In some situations, if it's murderous, take a step back, walk away, make a call. I've also personally, just secondary to this comment, been recently in a situation where, and I want to address actually both a question and to move on, and I hate to bring it back, but I've been in a situation where I was told a lot of information that frankly I didn't want to know, that required me to do something about it. And I first requested that person do something for themselves, and that I gave them and I still am tackling with this ethic, which is a moral based ethic of, I believe in doing the right thing, even if it causes Jean Valjean syndrome, where I steal a loaf of bread for my family and I get sent to prison for life. So, I mean, and I believe in that. It means if I have to put my body in front of yours, fuck it. Excuse my language. Sorry. But secondary. So I believe that we must do these things, even if we love a person or care about a person. If they don't do it for themselves, it's up to us, right? So which leads me to the next question. Is the right thing in this situation, and having the respect to get the response from people about their respect from us, because I believe that when a doctor tells you you're going to die, people tend to stop drinking and smoking, and that's like just a fact of the statistics. So the question is, Smith, really, when you stopped your friends, was it because they held you in esteem, or was it because you were there?
They would have me on around. We would always go out and do stuff, and they'd always like start fighting about stuff. It was just like, it was embarrassing to them because like I for a while I was just like putting up with it, and then they're realizing like, oh shit, we have company, and it's like, like I don't know. I think that the embarrassment kind of, I don't think I hope they didn't continue it in private, but I feel like the embarrassment made them realize that they were kind of being shitty to each other.
I wanna pass the baton to Pep, because I know Pep's want to get in here. So go ahead, Pep, and then Pancakes wanted in. So go ahead.
Hopefully y'all can hear me now. Basically what I was trying to say earlier. Yeah, it's all good? Okay, awesome. Yep. I think that in the moment, if things are getting serious, it can be important and the responsible thing to do to try to diffuse like the immediate situation. But I think addressing any of like the actual abuse and solving any of it is not going to happen in that moment. People are like emotionally activated. People are like heated. It's not a good time to solve things. It's just a good time to like triage the immediate situation and then maybe offer solutions for later. Like, hey, if you want to talk about this, hey, maybe you guys should talk about it to a therapist.
Can I ask you a question, Pep? This is not just a Pep. I guess this is a panel as a whole, because I keep hearing this like, oh, if it's appropriate, step in. If you think it's the right time, you should step in, right? If it's safe, you should step in. Do you have any advice or any thoughts, right, on how someone can tell the difference between it's okay to step in, you should step in, versus call the cops or just leave?
I think that like physical safety, you can kind of gauge that, but you also never know how people are going to react. So I think anytime you're engaging to break something up, you should go in knowing that like shit could hit the fan. Like people are emotional and crazy. They can get even more crazy. So I think you should go in knowing that things can get worse. But I think the times to step in are when you see somebody like clearly struggling to advocate for themselves and they're like either going to be harmed more emotionally or physically. I feel like if you can safely step in, those are the times to do it. But yeah, again, like even if it seems safe to step in, just go in knowing that it might not actually be. And if it's very clearly not safe to step in, then yeah, calling whoever needs to be called is the best option.
I want to open this to group. Any other thoughts on that? Because I'm very curious, right? Like,
I have a number
what can I tell? When
thoughts.
can I tell the difference and how? Go ahead.
There are specific lines, at least in my business, of knowing who to call and when to call, and when you have an obligation, depending upon your position. If it's an audience member, we don't expect them to do much, to be frank with you. So from the position of standing at front of house, you've got a barrier around you, and you can see everything around you. The first thing we do is you got to call security. So I would say, just for the general lay person, go find somebody. There's a great example from the Astroworld event where a girl jumps up on stage. Sorry. Oh, your mic is muted. It's where a girl jumps up on stage and she talks to a cameraman. Now, unfortunately, that cameraman couldn't hear her because of where he was next to the speakers. He had earplugs and he also had a director in his ear. So he didn't know to grab his radio until he pulled his earpiece out. You actually even see it in the video. So he did what he should. He got a lot of smack. And this is the reason why I bring this up. He got a lot of smack for not jumping to to the conclusion that something was wrong. Because, which is another thing is what do we know? It's hard to tell. And you're always going to be putting yourself in a slight position of.
Do you err on this? Which side do you
problem.
err on generally?
If I'm in charge, I err as the fool's error. I go towards the fire.
Like I err as the fool's error. What does that mean?
That means I rush in where angels fear to tread, and on that level.
What does that mean?
Oh,
does
sorry,
anyone else
they're
understand
metaphors.
this? Like
I will rush in towards the fire or towards the problem, literally. Because
puts himself in harm's way.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
sorry.
No, maybe you're misunderstanding. Okay.
No.
If you have a situation, you aren't sure 100% which to do, whether to step in or whether to not step in. Which do you err on generally, stepping in?
Personally, stepping in.
Okay.
But I would tell an audience member not to. See, that's the thing is I see it from all different sides. If I'm standing in the audience, I'm looking towards the boss to figure it out for me. And if he doesn't, maybe I will because I've already had that position. But I would not suggest to any person out there as a layperson to just leap
so
into
your
a subject.
advice is not to step in general.
I would say call a person.
Call
don't
someone
step
else.
in.
Okay. What I want to hear some from other people. What do you think, Rora? What's your instinct here?
I would personally, I'm going to go for the tactful approach. I would not immediately step in. I think that if people are willing to act to a certain degree in front of others, they are typically prepared to act more unhinged in private. So if someone's screaming at each other in front of you, who knows? They probably throw shit at each other, when you're not there. So you want to err on the side of people could potentially always overreact. And I've been in a position where me and my ex were in a physical fight and he was physically abusing me and the police were called and I didn't do it. The neighbors did. But for whatever reason, he turned that on me. So there's a lot of danger in this. And even in a non-physical standpoint as well. If I have two friends in front of me that are fighting and I might be concerned for maybe one friend's welfare than the other, I'm not going to point it in any direction. I'm going to go, hello, you guys are making me super uncomfortable here. Can we maybe not yell right now and make it a general I'm uncomfortable thing versus it's your fault. You wait for that. You wait for that.
I see a bee. I see a fairy queen. I want to give Temperance Quill, who hasn't spoken at all, a chance to answer this question. Temperance.
The question was about when is it good to step in or not step in?
Yes.
That's extremely situational to me because a lot of it depends on who is being abused and who is the abuser. If you have an adult beating the crap out of a kid, then I'm just as on a personal level, I would probably smack the crap out of him, get the kid, and call the cops. If you have two adults interacting with each other, then of course a lot of it depends on severity. Because Aurora said,
well, let me clarify. Let me clarify a bit. Maybe kind of rephrase the question. You have a situation. You're at a friend's house. Your friends start fighting. You don't know who how. I guess how can you tell right? When they're both screaming at each other, who is the abuser and who is the abusee, right? And what do you do in that situation, right? Where it's not clear.
So a lot of that would depend on how well I know them,
Mm.
obviously. But I would say I would try to judge as far as what is the chance of physical violence actually happening. If they're just screaming at each other, then I might just wait for them to cool off and maybe talk to them one-on-one later, be like, hey, what's going on? You know, what's this all about? And try to help them that way. If I think it's actually going to extend to actual physical violence, then I would probably try to intervene in a verbal way while keeping myself safe. But try to see if I can bring, it's like, hey, y'all got somebody right in front of you who's watching you do this crap. And then depending on how it escalates from there, you know, adjust whatever actions I would take.
Okay, $2 from Fondue to say, good night, guys, Fairy Queen, Viking, Berserker, W. Okay, there we go. I wanna give it to, I see you, Pancakes, I do. And you're gonna go after these ladies. B, Fairy
No,
Queen.
Pancakes can go first.
Okay.
I've
Pancakes,
definitely yapped a lot.
Well, just real quick, like, I am gonna be asking Rora something specifically, so if you want to keep the flow
well,
going.
that's why I'm saying, like, I wanna before we get off this question, because I want to give everyone a chance to answer this question, then we can Pancakes can interrogate and abuse Rora, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Love it.
So, two things. If I don't know them well enough to know who would be the abuser versus the abusee, in terms of either a knowledge of their relationship or not, then I will absolutely do what Rora suggested and come in and state, I'm really uncomfortable, or pretend I didn't even realize that they're fighting and kind of just stumble my way into it to make it like, whoops, bees here. Oh
Make
my
it
gosh,
funny,
her knitting's
yeah.
everywhere. Yeah, whatever. Like, I will knock something off the counter if need be. When I do know who is being the abused person, one thing I learned with sexual assault survivors is their autonomy, which has been violated for a long time, especially in abusive relationships, is really important. So I'm not going to intercede or call the cops until they tell me that's what they want. And being their friend and being their lifeline, with some of my with a lot of my friends, the phrase that we always say is the tomatoes in my garden are very green this year. And if they text me that or say that, their abuser won't know that something's up because I garden a lot. It's very low key, but I will immediately either come get you, grab the money that we have stashed away, or call the cops. But I want that to be their determination because I don't want to be another person taking away their autonomy.
Thank you. Fairy Queen, go for it.
I'm gonna head out actually, but it was super lovely talking to all y'all. Thanks for having me, Wick, and yeah, I hope to be back in some way in the future.
Gang,
Have a
check
good
her out
night.
at Art by Pep.
Oh yeah,
and also
yeah, exactly.
And also on
Art by
Twitch,
Pep,
Art by
Twitter,
Pep, all
Twitch,
one word. Go give her a follow, gang. I'll shout you out.
All right.
Okay. Fairy Queen, go
Thanks
ahead.
so much. Have a good one.
Bye.
So you will have to forgive me, but let me see if I understand the question correctly. So the question is, if you see two friends and they're a couple and they are arguing and you are not sure who is being abusive, what do you do in that situation?
Do you step in? Do you leave? What is your instinct here? I'm just asking for your instinct, right?
My instinct is to step in. My instinct is to step up and to say something. And I say that for a couple of reasons. I think that acknowledging the consequences, because what's the worst thing that's going to happen if I step up and I say something? The worst thing that could happen is that they act violently towards the other person in front of me, or that they act violently towards the other person when I'm gone, which is
or they kill you.
Or they kill me. But I think that I'm willing to accept that risk that something bad could happen to me. I think that me stating that this behavior is unacceptable and that you're not allowed to treat each other this way and that I'm not going to stand for it, I think that we have a moral responsibility to state what behavior we're willing to tolerate and what behavior we're not willing to tolerate. I think that, and while I value thinking about the autonomy of other people and considering and respecting other people's boundaries, I also think that it's really important to have boundaries for ourselves and moral standards for our personal individual selves that we are willing to put up with in our everyday lives. So even if you think it's annoying that I worry for you on your behalf and pick up the phone and make that call, I am willing to potentially lose a friendship with you over you potentially continuing in a situation that's harmful for you. I think it's better to say something and to have that sense of integrity than to not have it.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Pancakes. You had something for Aurora, and then we'll probably, unless we get more subs in chat. Thank you for the subs, Denflix. Unless we get more subs, donations, super chats, bits, we'll probably wrap it up and call it a night. So if you want more content, you got to give me more money. That's how this works. Okay, gang. Okay.
Can I finally abuse
Spend the
Rora?
man
You
money.
can. I
Abuse me, baby. Let's do it.
All right, so I'm gonna give you a specific anecdotal because you seem to be more aware of emotional abuse, right? So I'm gonna
Right.
give you a specific high school example in my past. I was dating a girl for 2 weeks, and all the way up to that point, she ended up using the big S, right, as like the kind of like hanging it over my shoulder to break up, which I'm sure you probably would recognize that as abusive in itself, right?
Yeah.
But my reaction of saying okay, bye in response to that, and then immediately blocking them be abusive?
No,
But that
it was only 2 weeks. Like that.
Yeah.
That's a boundary. I think 2 weeks is not a long enough time to say that it's abusive for you to if they're serially holding something over your head. I'd say that's a boundary, not abuse.
Okay, now what about I'll give you a different example because there was also another girl in high school. Angry Birds recently came out. I had the iPod 3rd gen touch.
God, I'm old.
The weather was
Yeah.
clear, right? The sun shined
Oh.
brightly. You know, we had it all. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. What's your point, buddy? Let's go.
Sorry, I'm on NyQuil and Melton. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Jesus.
So basically, she complained about the fact that I wouldn't communicate with her. That we would go like a week without an entire week with no communication, and then she would demand that I pay more attention to her, right? Which seems pretty reasonable, correct?
A demand? No. I'd say a communication and saying what your needs are is reasonable, but I say making demands isn't a relationship. Once you get to having to make demands, then that's now that's trying to place control.
Rora, let me
Yeah?
ask then. What is the difference between making a demand and setting a boundary? Saying, hey, unless you spend more time communicating with me, I don't think I want to be in a relationship with you. Versus, like, how is that? What's the difference between? Why is that abusive? Other than just setting a boundary, it's a demand, is it not?
I phrased it wrongly. I think my phrasing
I
of
want to
demand.
hear Rora's answer. I want to hear Rora's
What
answer.
the difference between a demand and a boundary is?
Yeah, a demand and setting a boundary. Making a demand.
I mean,
versus setting
you
a
could
boundary.
definitely gray area your way into saying a boundary is a demand because there's typically some sort of ultimatum, right?
Yeah.
So you could feel like that's a demand, but I think that's an extreme emotional reaction to someone's boundaries because I've definitely had my boundaries flipped on me as demands. Right. So I think it depends on how you communicate that. Are you being, you have to do this? Or are you saying, hey, when you do X, it makes me feel X? You know what I mean?
You're supposed to care about me. If we're in a relationship, you're supposed to care about me. I shouldn't even have to make a demand. If we both have a mutual goal of having a healthy relationship. So my emotions matter, and if you're hurting me, then you should care about that. I shouldn't even have to be a threat.
Well, real quick, my response to this, I'm wondering if this would be viewed as abusive, where I literally tell her verbatim, I'm too busy playing Angry Birds.
Well, then you're not ready for a relationship.
No, I was in high school. Yeah, I was in high school.
These are adolescent. Definitely, yeah.
That was funny, but come on, man.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm satisfied with this answer though, because I'm still trying to figure. I understand. No, just real quick. Because I'm hearing in chat, for example, a boundary is telling someone they can't do something. A demand is telling someone they must do something. But I don't think that's necessarily true. And if that is true, I don't think all demands are necessarily bad. I think that setting a demand, right, or a boundary, whatever you want to call it, like, hey, if we're in a relationship, I need you to do this. Otherwise, we are not going to be in a relationship. I don't think that's necessarily
a demand for that. Right? In a relationship, there is a demand for being attentive. There is a demand for caring. Yes. And if you're not meeting those in quote demands, then are you even a part of the relationship? So you could look at it that way, right? There are demands, and there are different demands based on what you do. There's demands when you work a job, when you do physical things. It depends on how you define demands, right? So yeah, if you want a relationship, but you don't want to do any of the things that involves being in a relationship, then you are not meeting the demands of the relationship.
When does it turn from a healthy demand to an unhealthy demand?
Okay, this is what it does, because when you make you can look at all relationships transactionally, but if you are to point out the transactional the transactional exchange of all your interactions in your fucking relationship, that becomes abusive. That you're turning everything into a threat. So in a relationship, you have to have sex with each other once, eventually, or else you're not going to be dating. But to say that explicitly, if you don't fuck, we're not dating like that now. Okay, well, that was true, but now that you said it, it's not okay.
Well, that's true too, because I think it depends on how you approach it, right? If you say, we haven't been having sex and I'm not feeling very loved because that is a need I have that's not being met, versus we're not having sex and that doesn't make you a partner. If someone approached me and said, I'm not having my needs met, and say there's a reason for that, I may communicate that. But if someone's saying, your obligation to be with me is to fuck me, I'm most likely not gonna want to fuck them. So you know what I mean? It really depends on how it's communicated, and that's what I mean about emotional abuse. If it's a one-off or whatever, and you're being blunt or abrupt or a dick or whatever, we're all dicks. We're human beings. It's in our nature, right? But it depends on how often we do it. Are we listening to the other person? I think that's a massive part of it too. Do we care about how the other person feels when we're communicating these needs or demands?
No.
I want to have established in my relationships, there's a layer of cushion where even if the transaction is hurting me and it's not working, I'm sticking with you for there's a layer of cushion so there, that I think is undermined when you make the transactionality so explicit.
Well, I have a quick question on because I know that you guys definitely have a certain viewpoint. And I definitely agree, in retrospect, because high school is high school, right? If you're diagnosed
Here's
with
no high school relationship is healthy. Okay, continue.
yeah, to be honest. But if you're diagnosed with Asperger's at 4 years old and you have you're very passable in the sense of not being
functional, I get it. Go on.
Yeah. So in that context, am I would I be abusive by default, at least through the perspective of other people, if I especially during my earlier years where I was developing a certain finesse of certain social interactions? Am I an abuser?
Okay, let me try to understand this question. I'll rephrase it for you, and maybe you can tell me if this is correct or not correct, what you're trying to get across. What is the difference between being abusive versus just being socially inept? Is there a difference, right? If you, because of your social ineptness, as to Smeth's point, makes these transactions very readily apparent, right? When is it abuse versus when is it just you're just suck at relationships, right? Or is there a difference?
I'd say intent.
Yo, and thank you, Kimmy Marie, 𝕶𝖎. Thank you for the raid. Appreciate it.
I liked your answer. Was that you, Aaron?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Can you repeat it for the class?
There was intent. I believe it's intent, and just like the definitions in difference between. And I'm sorry, I'm cheating here. I have an AI in the background that gives me answers. So she says, Eva says it's that demand refers to a request or requirement for something, whereas a boundary defines the limits of scope on something. And I think there's a distinct difference between those two things. And both of them really inquire a different intent and prefacing, a context to each one of them, which I say is what I think was being said before, Smith.
But intent is I understand what you're saying, but that's so hard to measure, right? I cannot know what is in someone's heart. Right? I know it's not impossible to measure. We have a court system that deals with this all the time, right? But when it comes to social settings, it can be very hard to discern intent. So I don't like using intent. I like using behaviors. And
right.
I'm gonna be real clear with you guys.
Yeah, sure.
I think in a lot of cases, intent don't matter.
Okay,
Yeah.
but so the thing,
what if you're showing
it doesn't matter, but
behavior? because I think that most of the people we judge people on their actions, the context,
The
of their actions.
behaviors
Yes.
that they do.
Yes,
Yeah.
but so
Yeah,
it doesn't matter for judging like the single instance, but as far as like the intent actually does actually affect the behavior in that
I agree.
it is for when this becomes a long-term like this becomes a reoccurring instance, like this is a pattern of behavior. And it doesn't matter what your intent is, it is already a pattern of behavior. If their intent was to control you, which is the intent of making an explicit threat or like a demand, then you expressing your needs to them is going to like not work. If their intent is not to control you, then it means that they're still a receptive partner, and so you can talk about it and it will become better. So the intent actually will impact the outcome in that case.
Okay.
I think, I think intent is it depends, right? Because someone could abuse someone and say, well, I had good intentions, and there's a lot of people who don't intend on abusing people. There's a lot of delusion involved, right?
People could be
But-
accidentally abusive, yeah.
Well, like what Smith was kind of bringing up too, where like there's almost like a buffer area in relationships where we have to sort of afford some sort of people aren't entitled to it, but there's got to be a buffer area of forgiveness. If I have a partner who's being casually emotionally abusive, but he doesn't mean to, but it's say he has PTSD and a lot of trauma, and he gets very emotional and abusive every time I communicate, right? But I see that he's trying. I see he's actively cares that he's hurting me. He is acknowledging the hurt is inflicting on me. I am more likely to give that person a chance and allow them room to grow versus someone who is explicitly making demands. You can't do this, you can't do that without providing any reason, or you make me feel X, or hearing how I feel in return. I sort of see a demand as holding someone hostage in a way, emotionally. That's how I would look at it versus a communication or a boundary.
So, and I don't mean to like poke and just bop my nose if I am, right? But isn't that sort of what happens where the victims will excuse the abuse of their abuser by saying, well, he has PTSD or he went through this, just a fire child.
Of course, and I have excused my abusers a lot. I've often excused my abusers. I did it quite often. He's a good guy. Everyone sees him as a good guy or whatever, right? And or he doesn't mean it. And I think that it depends. How long is it happening? To what degree is it happening? Are you seeing change? Are you seeing a positive curve upward? It depends, right? If it's continuing in this direction and you're not seeing any improvement, then of course. But if you're seeing this person actively make changes, seek therapy, things like that. But if you don't personally want to deal with it anymore, that's okay too. You know what I mean?
Can I ask a question here? Because this is actually why I hopped up is the line of rehabilitation. And I know you guys kind of covered this, but where do we actually draw the line personally as opposed to in society? I know you covered society, but personally, where is the line for our loved
I'll
ones
answer
of
you that,
rehabilitation?
right?
Yeah.
How many times must I forgive those who trespass against me? Right? Very famous question asked a very famous person. I think every time. Now, that does not mean I accept them entirely into my life, right? That does not mean I do not set and keep boundaries. But again, I'll repeat something I said earlier. Holding a grudge is drinking poison and hoping someone else dies. I really want to decouple these things. I want to decouple boundaries from how I view someone. Right? I want to decouple boundaries from forgiveness. I can keep boundaries up and still forgive someone and still give them support and still give them what they did. I can do both of these things. And I think we all can. But we get up in the feels about it, and where we're like, well, I can never feel safe, or I can never feel this. And no, you can't. But that doesn't mean you have to demonize, dehumanize, and deperson. I think, again, how many times must I forgive the people who trespass against me? 7 times? No, 7 times 7, right? Until this is just makes it better for you. It makes it better for society. It makes it better for them. It's those who cannot forgive are only hurting themselves. That's my answer. I want to hear Fire Queen. Fire Queen.
Before you move on, though, I have one. I'm sorry. Lincoln, let me ask you one question because I never get to ask you.
Okay,
anyway.
quickly.
So where does your line then end? Where does that end? Like,
What do you mean? Where does it end? I said
like,
in any condition, even those who do against bad things towards me, right? Like I've never been as like I wasn't. There are certain abuses that I've never experienced, and maybe my mind would change if I experienced those abuses. But I would hope that it would not. I would hope that I could still take this concept and principle, and even regardless of the actions done against me, still hold that. I don't know if I can, but I would hope that I can. I want to give space to Fairy Queen and Joey, and then we're probably going to end this because no one's giving me money. Give me money. I will never forgive you, chat. All that stuff I said, toss it out the window. I will never forgive you. I
can
will
help.
hold it against you forever.
If you're not a high mage, bro, I don't know who is.
Fairy
Come on,
Queen,
that
go
was
ahead.
very admirable.
Am I answering your question, Aaron, about rehabilitation? Where does it begin? Where does it end? Is that
I would like to know, because I heard a lot of different interesting reactions earlier about societal rehabilitation. That actually is why I hopped up. But I'd like to know about, since we're at the personal, interpersonal, where is the line? Where are you drawing the forgiveness? Because I know I have a bunch of different feelings about it personally, about stupid ways that I've dealt with it, but and smart ways I've dealt with it. And so I'm just wondering where everybody draws that personal line. Where how many smacks do you take?
For my personal line, for me personally, I'm willing to forgive a lot of things that have happened to me personally. So for somebody that does something to me individually, that's something that, like, I've had people who have made mistakes, and I'm willing to, like, even as an employee, as a boss. I mean, I'm a teacher. I get people that say that they have a computer problem, or that they're sick when they're not really sick, right? Or people that like turn in like bad work that I give like better grades to, right? So I think that individually, personally, like when in my personal life, how I interact with people, I am willing to forgive quite a bit. Where I draw the line for me personally is when your behavior starts to impact the other people in my life, right? So a big reason why I would never want to have an abusive spouse, it's not even just because of what would happen to me personally. It's because if I have that person and I bring that person to my family or to my friends, it puts everybody who I care about in my interpersonal space at risk. And I might be willing to put like myself, and I don't really, that's one thing. It's an entirely different thing to put somebody who I am responsible for, people who I already love and care about, in jeopardy. And that's the reason, like, for me, like when it gets to the point where I'm inviting you into my space and into being a part of my community, I have very harsh boundaries for who I allow to come in and who I don't allow to come in because of the concern for other people. But interpersonally, outside of that, I'm willing to accept, well, I'm not willing to accept anything. I do have some boundaries, some things, obviously, I will never accept, right? So, but I am generally more forgiving interpersonally, like individually, one-on-one, than when you become a very close friend and you become a part of my community, is what I would say.
I wanna toss it to Joey, and then we're probably gonna head out.
Okay, so to this question, I'm not like, it's not a very easy question to answer, but like for me, as far as my forgiveness, my boundaries, I usually find it easier for me to make up that decision when I drown everybody out. And that's a very hard thing to do. I know it sounds easy, but it's a very hard thing to drown out everybody else. And including things that you kind of learned. You kind of have to unlearn those things. For me, though, I've forgiven, not a monster, but someone who did very monstrous things to me. And I actually got to say that in my victim statement, that he wasn't a monster, that he was, but what he did was monstrous. And for me, like right now, if I have a friend or someone that I consider close, that I have divulged vulnerabilities, because I'm a little bit more protected now. If you sit there and you weaponize my vulnerabilities, basically putting them into bullets so that you can shoot them back at me, you're going to be very limited at that.
Okay. Thank you, one and all, for coming to this show. I hope everyone had fun. I hope everyone. Oh, what's up?
I want to see if I can help you get cash real quick. Can I abuse your audience just real quick?
I mean,
go ahead, but then we're gonna close it out.
Donate to WhickTV. Do it right now.
I just lost all my followers and audience. Thank you though. Thank you. Thank you
VOD deleted.
for helping.
VOD deleted.
Yeah, thank you all of you. Thank you all of you for coming. I know this is a heavy topic. I know this is a robust discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you to the caller-inners who called in. Thank you to my audience for sticking it out. Thank you to the raiders who raided. Who we raiding into, gang? Who we going into? We could go to Art by Pep. She's still streaming. Are any of you still streaming?
I
show's at 9
am,
tonight.
but I was told that my Twitch stream isn't even working. But I'm not going to stream after this. Whatever.
Oh, okay, so you're closing out. So we'll just raid into Art by Pep then.
Awesome.
All right.
Oh, okay. Let's go.
I feel like a
And
boat
gang,
should appear.
Goodbye, everybody.
remember to tell her that it's a hate raid and spam those emotes. Okay, gang, I love you. See you tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. We're gonna talk about 𝕵𝖎𝖙, and what that is. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Later. Thank you, Wick.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Wick.
Of course.